I don't believe trade is the main driver of that, but I'll grant that it does happen sometimes.
Who cares about bringing in money? Okay, the whole idea of running like a business.
I don't really think it's something that you should take. I don't know.
The argument against charging people rent?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, typically the philosophical argument
that's a legitimate criticism, because, I mean, you look at why USA was even invented.
I don't know. Like, I think a recurring theme or a recurring trend is that
less and less government. I want personal responsibility. I want personal accountability.
Say that I'm like left of liberal. I don't identify like a communist or any of this stuff. Probably like a why would that be revelatory to know that water boils down?
About people who are diplomats or ambassadors from other.
Did I say that? Did I say that it was theoretically possible to include increase?
Natural society is a society where it's survival of.
You can. What you're describing, you can't do. It's, first of all, not what I'm talking about. Second of all, we can't.
So basically, like, even your Lord and Savior Donald Trump didn't do the best job
at nature. You refer to it as being conscious, or the conscious community.
So I think that gay marriage at the Constitution and the Supreme Court level actually...
No, but my man just is in the building.
And I find it very interesting that fellow believers are...
Yeah, sure, there are examples, but these are minor examples compared to the ones that I'm giving. I'm talking about two.
It's unconstitutional, they shouldn't do it. But now they're arguing about, well, if they do it...
This video is a little blonde hair. Yeah, that's what your mom said last night, too.
Let's ignore USAID. That's obviously upsetting you, and I get that. Because
no, it's not upsetting me.
There's a reason I'm successful. There's a reason why I'm liked.
This is exactly why Democrats...
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. I am Sarah, the Raging Tomato, here presented to you live another Throwdown Thursday. Joining with me this evening is the Paranoid American. We've got eugenics going all over the place tonight. However, his claim is that today in American society, our eugenics are worse than they were during World War II, or maybe pre-World War II, correct?
All of it, before, during, and after, outweighed anything that the Germans were doing in their wildest dreams.
Oh my goodness. So, ladies and gentlemen, Paranoid American is also dual streaming. If you could go over, send some love, like, subscribe, share, send him some money over there too. Do that. We like that. All of those things above and beyond. And outside of that, Paranoid American, I'm going to leave it to you to give us kind of an opening thought, and feel free to shout out who you are, where you're from, where they can find you, anything you want to share as well. And then we'll get into it.
All right. Well, you can find me at paranoidamerican.com, ex-military, ex-Disney animator, current, maybe ex-Freemason. I don't know where I stand with them after the last few things that I've put out. I've also been publishing comics specifically about conspiracy theories and occult research since about 2012. Got about 60 titles. I got a series with Sam Tripoli called Chaos Twins. I've got a comic on MK Ultra, Titanic, Satanic Panic. Anything you can think of that is conspiracy or occult or American related, it's something that I've been working on. So I'm excited about this topic just because it's one of those ones that when I first learned about it, it was shocking and it was hard to believe, and I didn't really believe it originally. And then over time, it just came up so often, so ubiquitous, so easy to prove that it almost feels as if it became common knowledge to me. And then it's easy to assume that it becomes common knowledge for everyone. So when I talk to someone, I guess in the back of my mind, like, oh, they know that the American eugenics program, outdid Germany's, and it is still going on, and all the same people are still funding all the same things. But I guess if you step back, it sounds a little extreme. So let me give you the most extreme version, oversimplified, of this statement. And that's really that we don't even get the Nazis in World War II doing all the horrific things they did without Kellogg's and Rockefeller and Walt Disney.
Oh, those are three big names. Now, I've heard the Rockefellers a lot, but Disney and Kellogg's, that's kind of a little new to me to like add to the conspiracy list. So I'm all ears.
Well, I'm glad because the Kellogg one is one of the really easy ones to bring into this. So, and let me just specify this with the Disney. I'm dangling that in there as like a little conspiracy carrot. It's not that Disney was into eugenics based on any research that I'm aware of, but I do believe on a separate tangent, maybe for another show, that the Walt Disney Company and Walt Disney himself, they kind of reinvigorated the Germanic identity prior to World War II. As like the German people were struggling with some kind of national identity, all of a sudden he's putting out Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and like all of these other grim fairy tale derived stories. And now the entire world is falling in love with Germanic folklore, and it gave the German people this identity they had been like struggling with. And I don't think that Walt Disney was like planting seeds or anything like that, but I feel like it's like a perfect storm. Like they just needed a little bit of push in one direction and some ideas in another direction, and then all of a sudden, like the world becomes a petri dish in which nothing exists in a vacuum, and ultimately nothing that Germany ends up doing in terms of like their eugenics program and the atrocities, none of that would have happened without America setting all of that up and putting them on a tee. Like, and if we had to give a percentage, and I can pull up numbers as we go, but the percentage isn't even close. It's like 80% American funded, American based research that the Germans were just like, hey, we can expand on this. Thanks for the great idea. We're going to go ahead and implement this.
Oh my God. It's all our fault.
Well, unfortunately, yeah, it's definitely America, Britain a little bit, but mostly America. And I do want to say, though, that like the Nazis get criticized for being socialist, right? That's literally the National Socialist Party is where you get the word Nazi. And that's kind of what it was. Like this was the socialist version of eugenics, where the state decides how much it needs to give out and who's going to qualify for it. Whereas in America, it wasn't a perfect system, but it was more capitalism based. It was like, hey kid, you want to earn $200? Just sterilize yourself. We don't want any more of you out there. So here's some money and just fix yourself. And I mean, it gets a little bit worse than that, but that's the sales pitch. And then ultimately, that's the main difference between early 20th century eugenics in Germany and in America. America, it was incentivized in some cases. A lot of cases it wasn't. In Germany, there was no incentive. It was just like, get in the back of the truck, and then by the end of it, you either don't exist or you're not having kids.
Wow. So what would you say the starting point of eugenics? Where did this all begin?
All right, I got some notes. So the word itself, it starts in 1883 by Francis Galton, and he's the father of the word eugenics. I don't want to say father of eugenics in terms of like implementing it, but he came up with this concept. And it's based on the word eugenia, I think, like a Greek word for like perfect human or something. So essentially, he creates this organization that's going to focus directly into eugenics. And they hold something called the First International Congress of Eugenics in 1912. So like maybe a decade after he comes up with this term. And there's 58 research papers presented here of people that have been following along. A lot of it's kind of based on Darwinian. A lot of it's based on different genetic theory that was novel at the time. They're just figuring out, if I plant these two beans, I can get these genetics out of the beans, right? So like it's new. It feels so cutting edge. So everyone's in on it. This is like a global fascination that everyone is on board with. Out of the first International Eugenics Conference, 58 research papers, 42 of those were American. So again, this is something America was all in on, more so than any other country, even England, which kind of takes second fiddle to this. And Germany was just sort of like a pick-me at the end of it.
Wow. Okay, so Americans were like they were the ones that were kicking this off, essentially. If they're the ones that published the most papers and were deeply involved in it from the very get-go, was there incentive to even researching this factor?
Yeah, well, I can kind of cut right to the answer of like why would America be behind it? Had all the money. We had all of the railroad tycoons at this time. You had the Rockefellers and the Morgans, the Harrimans. The Harriman is a name that doesn't exist anymore because that wealth transfer ends up in like the Bush family if you trace it back far enough. But these were like the titans of industry globally, and this is what they're deciding to put all their money into. I mean, if you take a step back and look even in 2026, the amount of money that, say, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation put towards the same exact programs, but with different names and different justifications. But it's essentially the same research that was started over 100 years ago by these original eugenics organizations.
But but what's the end goal? To like make the world a better place, or
Yes,
kick out the?
it's two-pronged. The one is that the world is becoming overpopulated, so we need to figure out a way to reduce overpopulation. That's the one prong of it. And then the other prong is get rid of all the stupid people, get rid of all the morons, and get rid of anybody that has any kind of physical deficiencies. Here's an example, just because I don't know if this will work into a tangent later, but a good example of this is Alexander Graham Bell, right? Inventor of the telephone. I believe his wife was deaf, and he wanted to wipe deaf people off of the planet, as did his wife, because they saw it as this deficiency, and that if you were deaf or if you had a deaf family member, that you should get sterilized to proactively ensure that somebody else, like down your genetic line, would not pass that trait of being deaf. But it was crazy because they had like a school for the deaf, like from outward appearances, everything they were doing was like for deaf people, but they wanted to eradicate that trait from the human race, essentially. And the eugenics program becomes so massive and it takes up so much money because all of the people that realize what has to be done is that you need to account for people that aren't even in your jurisdiction. They're not even in your state or your city or your country even, right? Like you need to do something that is so massive and so well funded that you're going to prevent people in Guyana from reproducing. Like that's literally the extent to what they realized where this had to go. And it was really easy at first because some of the early eugenics programs in America, they would focus on people that were criminals or criminally insane. And a lot of the times in the insanitariums, someone's not necessarily sitting there and splitting hairs. Like if you showed up at their front door, criminal, insane, it's kind of like, whatever, we got an open room at the end of that hallway. So that's where you're going to live now. So that was really easy because these people don't have agency. Very often, if they had family members, the family members would take care of them. And if they aren't taking care of them, then they don't care what the state does to them. So it's really easy pickings, like low-hanging fruit. We can just sterilize all these people. And the premise is that don't let them have kids because their kids are going to turn up to be just like them. So that's a pretty simple formula. You don't have to really understand genetic or biology to understand 2 + 2 = 4 in that case, right?
Right. No, I mean, I could understand the clinically insane, and not only on the concept of like you shouldn't have kids because we don't want you to pass that bad thing down, but even more so, like, are they capable of even taking care of them as well? Right. That's a dangerous piece. And would you want somebody reproducing who isn't mentally capable of caring for the child? Would it even be the best interest of the child alone? Right. I can kind of like teeter-totter that, or even a criminal, right? If you're like a serial killer, I definitely don't want children in the care of you, right? Or anything around that that's dangerous. I wouldn't even want you to have access to them because you're dangerous.
Right. So you personally are not putting up a protest sign outside the jail.
I'm not
saying,
running
like, eugenics for the
out.
criminals.
Yeah, I'm not running out trying to stop that. I can understand why it's like, okay, should we just choose for people? Should we decide whether they should or shouldn't have kids? I know that my First Amenders would really be yelling and screaming at me right now because it's like that's their choice, their people, whatever. But then you also
I don't know if eugenics is prevented by any of the Declaration of Independence. I don't really know if like First Amendment or Second Amendment or otherwise necessarily prevents eugenics from occurring.
I mean, that's the privacy of your home, right? Even this is where even marriage is even like kind of on the list of like an amendment or a right for you, right? Because it's still the privacy of your own home, so on and so forth. And children are considered to be your technically like kind of like property, right? These are my things. This is my stuff. I created this. You can't have it, right? But then you run into the idea of, well, if you're a danger to children, then the state will interfere. But otherwise, it's left to you to decide what to do with your kids. So I can understand how it would be. Should we allow people to be able to reproduce if they're clinically insane or like horrific criminals? And I'm not talking like they sell weed and go to jail, right? I'm talking like serial killer, Hannibal Lecter kind of style crazy. That's dangerous. But yeah, I wouldn't run out the door screaming, no, don't take away their right to do this. But I can understand why, well, if we let this little bit slide, how much more can slide in terms of the concept of eugenics? Like, then do we have the right to stop everyone or anyone based on what we deem as harmful to society?
Well, and I guess you would fit in with the vast majority of people. And that's exactly, if you look back at, especially in the States, but all of the human experimentation against unwitting and unwilling subjects, it always starts with criminals. Usually they'll do it in a prison system. And not because it's legal necessarily. It was at a certain point, but now it's not. But that's still usually where they'll start out with. So, okay, so we have this first International Congress. If we go back to 1901, this is where Francis Galton, he decides that he wants to address Huxley, because if you're not unfamiliar with Huxley, you might be familiar with Aldous Huxley, who wrote Doors of Perception. If not, he had a brother, Julian Huxley, who was the head of the European Eugenics group. But they're both famous because their father, Thomas Huxley, he was quoted as being the bulldog for Darwin. So whenever Charles Darwin had to go and debate somebody, Thomas Huxley would kind of, for lack of a better way of describing it, he's kind of like the bouncer. He's kind of like the hype man. And if someone was making a good point against Darwin, maybe he's the guy that throws out the logical fallacies and starts like attacking someone's character, like barking down at them.
Wow.
So that Charles Darwin, he's allowed to kind of be like, like reserved and professional, but he's got the attack dog on the side. So
that makes sense.
I'm oversimplifying that just so we don't go on a credible tangent, but it's interesting that that's essentially where the Huxley name came from. And the Huxley name still persists. Even if you're not familiar with Julian's work, you're most likely familiar with Aldous Huxley's work through everyone else. He's sort of been given the title of penning dystopian fiction, American dystopian fiction, or at least in English. So anyways, 1901, Galton puts in this Huxley lecture at the Royal Anthropological Institute, and in 1909 he becomes the honorary president of the society. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because all the names that start like joining these groups and starting these other branch off organizations, it kind of goes Galton as the idea man, Huxley's kind of become the PR firm. I'm oversimplifying, and then we got to figure out where the money's going to come from, right?
Right.
So every name after this starts to become with the money, but we can drop Winston Churchill, for example, was in attendance as well. So now you've got like some clout, you've got credit, like, oh, important people are here, they're on board. And that's sort of where America takes notice. So the Huxley angle, and have you ever heard of Thomas Huxley being the attack dog of Charles Darwin?
I feel like I know the name Huxley, but it's not like why I know the name isn't ringing the bell.
It's one of the three. It's probably not Thomas. That's lesser known. It's probably Julian or Aldous. Okay. So 1907 this is actually even before they have this first International Congress where America goes all in. They're like, hey, 42 out of the 58, it's all us. Like we're in on this. Even before that, 6 years before that, they actually pass in America, in Indiana, it was called the U.S. Sterilization Law. And believe it or not, the Indiana, it originally started in Indiana, it spread to 30 states, and the sterilization law was not taken off the books until 1974. So this is something that started 30 years before World War II, and it lasted another 40 years after World War II.
Now, did that only apply to like criminals and the clinically insane, or
you would
was
think
that?
So. You would think so. Here's from the actual law that was passed in 1907. Here's what it lists: confirmed criminals, rapists, all right, on board so far, right?
Yeah, I can be on both.
Idiots and imbeciles.
Well, okay, how did they define idiots and imbeciles?
I'm glad you asked. So this was not, again, like, and funny enough, I got to put my tinfoil hat on just for a second and get these jabs in. Like, I won't go too much on a tangent, but the Rockefeller Foundation ends up being the #1 financier of eugenics in the coming years. Not right now. We're in 1907 right now, but in the next like 20 or 30 years, they're going to become the leading financier. Coincidentally, the Rockefellers are also the ones that implement a standardized education system. Largely, they account that medical doctors were unreliable, that if you went from a city in New York to a city in California, that the doctors might not even be using the same terminology. They didn't go to the same schools. So the Rockefellers implement this system where education becomes standardized. You need a degree and you need to get a license and you have to go through these different. So that it's coincidental that the Rockefellers end up becoming, even, now, like the largest financiers of education systems, public education. Well, the way that you would determine if someone was an idiot or an imbecile was a test. It was some kind of a standardized test, but that originally in 1907, before Rockefellers are on the scene, it's not so standardized. You might go to 5 different like eugenics specialists and 4 out of 5 of them call you an idiot, but maybe that 5th one is like, there's hope for you yet. You don't necessarily have to get sterilized right now, but study a little bit. And here's some examples. So you're probably familiar with what like an IQ test is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, let me spin it around on you just for a second. If someone says, hey, I'm going to go and take an IQ test, like what goes through your mind? Like, why are they taking it? What does it represent? Like what's your impression of an IQ test?
I think it's just, honestly, in today's age, I think most IQ tests are just kind of like some type of pseudo measurement. I wouldn't say it's necessarily proof that you're intelligent. It just proves you know how to pass a test based on whatever the basic questions are. And I say that because I believe in trade schools and I believe that people are intelligent in different aspects. So I think an IQ test is a pseudo measurement.
So let me ask you, if someone's like talking about taking IQ tests, usually the implication is how smart are you? If you're your genius level, or are you just normal or something? The origin of the IQ test was actually to identify whether or not you were so stupid that you should be sterilized. And it was originally intended to identify problem children that were unteachable, to hold them back and not drag the rest of society down, but again to kind of ear tag them as, hey, maybe let's take her ovaries away, or maybe let's give him a snip or something. Or it might have been even worse than that. It started with castration, then it went to vasectomies, but it might have just been, you didn't pass this test, you're so stupid that you're not allowed to have kids now. And that was on the books now. This isn't just voluntary anymore. This isn't, hey, could you use an extra $200? It's take this test, you failed the test, follow me, snip, snip.
Now, were people forced into taking this test? What was the mechanism or the procedure to getting them to even like pointing out like, oh, we think that person's an imbecile, we should go test it and find out?
So to be clear, this Sterilization Act, again, passed March 9th, 1907 in Indiana, spread to 30 states and did not end till 1974. I don't want to mince words. This authorized forced compulsory sterilization. So this is not, like you stop by when you're bored one day, or they incentivize it because you're going to get, like, this is a forced sterilization program. Now, whether they were going to pull you off the street and be like, take this IQ test right now. Again, this is sort of the Wild West of eugenics. There's not necessarily a set way. Like you don't just get a summons that says like, show up to this place at this time. And as it spreads, each state and each jurisdiction kind of has their own resources and how they want to deal with this. And largely the reason why it lasted until 1974 is it was just like one of those laws that people stop enforcing in general, but you don't necessarily go back and like, all right, let's remove all of the old laws that we don't use anymore. Usually they just leave them in there and just don't enforce them. So it was,
or is it like a backup as a
just in case.
In case we want to just do something with this, we could do technically, like even cops using kind of, and not to shit on cops, right? But like utilizing kind of like backdoor tactics to be able to, well, we can pin you for this, even though we can't get
their, what is it called? Judicial discretion or something. Like they're allowed to, in the moment, decide whether you just committed that crime or if I care about it. So it very much, that's a good analogy. So it's on the books for all this time. So it's not like if it was universally enforced, but you were legally allowed to identify someone as a criminal, an idiot, a rapist, or an imbecile. And if you identified them as one of those four things on paper in the legal system, then you were allowed to force them to get sterilized. Now, as this played out in the real world, there was usually some sort of incentives along. If it was a civilian, if you were a criminal, bless you, if you were a criminal, there was zero chance that you were going to be able to like talk your way out of this if they decided that you were going to be one of the guys. So let me just get, in terms of numbers, we're talking about 60,000 people sterilized on the books between 1906 and 1970, I believe, which doesn't sound like a lot because this is just this narrow amount. But yeah, 60,000 people were forced to be sterilized in those 70 years.
Wow. They wonder why our birth rate issue is an issue.
Well, okay, so that was just the people deemed imbeciles and idiots and criminals and rapists. And to answer, how did they determine? Well, if you look at one of the old IQ tests, and I can't remember the name of the book. There was a book that was written by, I want to say, James Gould, that was criticizing the bell curve research. And the bell curve was basically like, there's going to be stupid people inevitably, and that was reinterpreted as, and we should just cull them out of the genetic pool. We should use eugenics to get rid of them. But he was showing, here's what we're on the test. So if you were to give someone an IQ test in the early 1900s, an example would show you a badminton racket and the little birdie, right? That's what it's called, I think, for badminton. Well, if you're giving a test that's like, identify this item, and someone just came from another country, and they don't necessarily speak English, that doesn't mean they're an idiot, that they don't know what a badminton racket is. Hell, even if you grew up in America, but you were just poor and you never had the opportunity to play badminton, you might not know what a badminton racket looked like and what to call it. So guess what? You just got -1 on your test for that particular question.
For something you would have never known.
You might get sterilized now because you didn't know what a badminton racket was.
What? So, I mean, if people were to take that test today, that same test that you're talking about back in the 1900s when they first laid it out there, how many people do you think, percentage-wise, would actually pass it?
I mean, it's all subjective, but I would assume maybe like 70% or so, just because it was so cultural, which was what it got criticized for in later years. But when they first rolled it out and they first got this on the books and they said, we got to figure out a way to call you an idiot or an imbecile so that you fit into this program, that would be one of those examples. There's an even better and easier one you can look up. The original, I don't know if you ever heard of the ASVAB test if you're going to join the military.
Yeah.
Okay. So the ASVAB, have you ever taken the ASVAB test? Okay. So the ASVAB test, it has certain questions on there that seem like at least the one that I took, it would have like a picture of a screw, and it would have like an arrow pointing clockwise. And
and it asks you like, which direction is this gonna, like, what do you have to, I remember the gears too.
If you wanted to, there was gears, and like, if you want to tighten a screw, which direction do you turn it in? And you didn't even have to spell it out. It was like arrow A or arrow B or whatever. So that the ASVAB test itself is actually a consolidation of two different tests that were introduced right around the same time for the same reasons as these eugenic IQ tests. So there was the A test, which was in English for English speakers, and it had like just questions, kind of like spelt out like you would expect on a normal test. And then there was the B test, and the B test was specifically for non-English speakers or people that were already kind of dumb or illiterate. And for those ones, there was no words at all. And it would basically, you would have an instructor. And here's an example, is it would have like 4 different human faces. and they would say what's missing, and they just had to like point on what's missing, and like one of the faces would be a man's face and it was just missing the nose, and then one would be like a woman missing an ear or whatever. So like that's sort of the original DNA of what turns into which way do you turn the screw. It was the Army B test.
Wow.
Now, if you could speak English and you failed the A test, that could also potentially mark you as being an imbecile or an idiot. And if you were a non-English speaker and you failed the B test, you were also marked as an imbecile or an idiot. So now you can imagine that, like, well, if you look at the drawings, it was not done by like a great artist. They were like scratches on like a napkin almost. And there were some of them where they're showing like a 6-shooter revolver and it's saying what's missing on this. Well, if you weren't familiar with guns are revolver, would you know if whether or not like the trigger was necessarily missing, or whether or not
how can you
hammer was missing, or
how can you know something you don't know, right? It almost sounds like it was set up to fail.
Well, I think it was this is where it gets into the controversial aspect of it, is that so much of the enforcement ended up being cultural. It was like, do you know what rich people, play for sport? Do you understand how to operate this gun that unless you had some money, you probably wouldn't have ever seen one in real life, unless it was the last thing that you saw in real life. So now all of a sudden, it's like cultural knowledge, not necessarily figuring out if you're an idiot or not. But if I picked you off the street, if you're the cop that's deciding who's going to take this test today and who you're going to sterilize, I feel like they could have picked them out of the bunch. Like, you could be driving down the street and be like, that kid's going to fail this test. Let's go ahead and get him in the back of the truck. So again, I'm oversimplifying it just so there's a visual, but this is how it played out over at least 20 or 30 years before Germany spoils it for America. Okay. So that's just the beginning. This is the 1907 U.S. sterilization in Indiana. That's just it being on the books. This is before people start actually enforcing it and getting really crazy with like the end goal. Because the reasonable aspect of this is we're going to remove criminals and idiots from society. So even someone that might be like, I don't know, that sounds kind of weird, but no one's is coming out with podcasts and being like, oh my God, people, the imbecile test is all cultural knowledge. You might fail it if you don't. No one is advocating this because no one really understands what eugenics is or what these tests are about, because it is brand new. This is novel science. Right. It would be like expecting like your mom to understand the last 10 years of AI developments unless she's been paying attention to everything, right?
Yeah, no, not yeah. I mean,
like
I get the phone calls. Like how do I turn the computer on?
Right. So she might have gotten sterilized, if this were 100 years ago. That would be grounds for sterilization. So okay, let me start dropping the names, because we've got the science and the people that want it to happen, but now we need some people actually funding this. So the law ends up getting pushed by this guy, Larry Sharpe, and he redescribes this as a way to prevent the unfit from reproducing. And he's the one that gets the Indiana law pushed to these other 30 states. So now it's over half the United States that's in on this. Well, Henry Clay Sharpe and a lot of these other names, I'm not going to do deep dives on every single name because there's so many, but there is a trend that they go into the military and they end up working for the military in these like mental health departments. And when they come back out, they kind of like stay in contact with each other, and all these like old military medical buddies kind of like form these little cliques, as as still happens today, right? 100 years later, not a lot changes. So he goes during World War II. He's the head of the U.S. Army Corps surgical unit in France. And when he gets out, he becomes the U.S. Public Health Service surgeon, like the top surgeon. He's there for like 9 years, and then he ends up working for the VA hospital in New Jersey. So while he's there, and the reason I'm doing a deep dive on Sharpe is he ends up performing one of the nation's first vasectomies in 1899. And he does it on a 19-year-old criminal named Clausen. And the reason he did it was because this prisoner was reported to be performing excessive masturbation. They couldn't prevent this guy from masturbating constantly in his cell, and he's already in jail. Like they've already done the worst thing you can do to him. And I'm going to assume, I don't have this on paper, I assume they probably beat his ass a little bit too. Like, hey, stop that. And it still didn't work. So they're like,
does it? I mean, what's it called? Is it called saltpeter?
Saltpeter? I don't know if they figured out saltpeter at this point.
Oh God, I was gonna say, like, I know that's like the easy fix, right?
Allegedly, that they put into, you know, your drinks in boot camp or whatever. But
yeah.
That was the rumor. So no, that was not on the table. The only options were castration. But luckily for Clausen, they, at this point in time, that was almost seen as like maybe too severe. Like maybe we can't fully castrate this guy. So I guess Henry Clay Sharp's like, I got it. We'll just like incise, you know, this little tube. Like, we'll still cut him, but we won't cut his balls off, but we'll cut his dick. And that'll be a little bit nicer for him. So they do that. And this becomes the very first. And you know what? It worked. He stopped furiously masturbating after this happened. So yeah, I mean, surprise, right? I'm
kind of scientifically, that kind of makes sense, right?
So after this occurs, I guess he makes quite the impression. And for the next 10 years, he's traveling around through all these different prisons, and he has a body count. I don't know what you would call a vasectomy count, like a head count. Let's say he's got a head count of over 450 vasectomies, all on unwitting prisoners. So if this guy shows up in your cell, like, it's not going to be a great day for you.
Whoa. So, but he's just, and they just allow him to do this.
Invite, ask him, you know, like they're probably taking this guy out for steak dinner and stuff. And because, again, not only is he a war hero, a good old boy American that's gone to college and has been serving his country, but he's also helping the nation eradicate these criminals. And if you're into this eugenics theories of the time, you're on board of like, if we kill enough of these criminals, eventually the jails will be empty and we will be criminal free. You just won't have criminals anymore.
Guess that didn't work out. Now did it?
Well, and it gets really extreme because another angle of this is I think it's called phrenology. I might have the word wrong, but it's basically taking measurements of somebody's skull and the ratio of like their jaw to their nose and just a whole bunch of these calculations. That will determine, well, it's almost like precogs in Minority Report, but it's just like old guys with rulers, and they're like, your eyes are a little far apart there. I think you might rape somebody, so we're gonna have to go ahead and sterilize you right now. Oh my God. And this was literally the same type of criteria that might have gone onto your test. Like, to go back to your analogy, which I really like, is like the cop on the side of the road that can determine how much he wants to enforce the law. Well, once that cop says, like, walk this line, right? Like, look into the light, follow this light with your eyes. Once you've found yourself that far into the process, they can definitely just, even if you pass everything, they're like, yeah, even though you passed the test, like, I know that you're drunk. Like, you're getting a DUI. We're towing your car.
Wow.
So I feel like something very similar would happen at this level, where it's like, look, you know, maybe you passed the test, but I know you're an idiot and you know you're an idiot. So snip, snip. So,
I'm just blown away. I didn't know we had that much history just to begin with, right?
Yeah,
and we can just do whatever we want. We just do whatever we want.
Right now on the timeline, we're at like the part where the kid starts to light the firecracker and the wick is just starting to get lit. Like, we're not even at the point.
We're not even there
where this
yet.
hit fever pitch. So we're still early 1900s. So, and the reason that I brought up Harry Clay Sharp is because there's another guy even bigger than him that replaces him as the leading voice of eugenics. So this guy, Harry Hamilton Lawlin, and he's the superintendent of a place called the ERO, which is a wild rabbit hole. I'll touch on it a little bit, but it was the Eugenics Record Office. And this was founded in 1910. And this is where they are storing records on who are idiots and who are criminals. So if your name finds its way into the ERO, that's not great for you or your family that will never be at this point. So, and the ERO is around until 1939, and it only shuts down because Germany spoils the party for all the eugenicists, they take it a little too far, and now anything that has the word eugenics in its name is frowned upon, right? So you'll see this like slow transition away from the word eugenics into mental health, into family planning. Like they changed the term, but it's the exact same funding, the same departments, the same people running the department.
Planned Parenthood comes into play?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's going to come in really soon. Yeah. And just to be clear, because I understand that it's very controversial to basically conflate abortion with eugenics. So all of the stats that so far are completely discounting abortions. Like I'm not including those. Once we add those numbers a little later on, it's going to be so many orders of magnitude away from anything Germany was trying to do that you're not going to believe it. But I've got the numbers and the stats.
Didn't I, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that like Planned Parenthood like originally started with Black women, and that's they wanted to like that's where it kind of kicked off at, was to decrease the Black population or something like that. I could be wrong.
It was holistic. So like the original eugenics movement, abortion was just one extra leg. Like here's another way that we can feed into this eugenics movement. And it takes like this racial tone a lot of the time. Like, yeah, absolutely. Just to answer your question directly, yeah, they were trying to make sure that Black people reproduce less and there would be less of them. That was the original intent. But it wasn't that Margaret Sanger sat down and was like, we need to get rid of Black people. It was truly anyone that's not me, anyone that's like not at this eugenics conference that I just went to. If they're not there, and they haven't gone to Harvard and they haven't gone to Princeton and they don't know what a badminton racket and a birdie looks like, then they shouldn't be sharing the same air as me or any of my kids. And I want to make sure that like my grandchildren don't have to grow up around their grandchildren. The exact same thing of like Alexander Graham Bell didn't necessarily hate deaf people. He just wanted them gone, right? And it's like, it's hard to say that.
How do you like weigh that?
Because
I don't hate them, but I don't want them here either.
It's because it's like this noble savage angle, or almost like the old explorers when they would come across, like the Hottentots of Mary Poppins. I'm allowed to say it because Disney said it, but like you've got these aristocrats that are basically going and becoming explorers in their retirement. That's how they live out like their midlife crisis. Like I'm going to go on a safari and I'm going to go in and hang out with some natives or something. It would almost be like they don't know how horrible their life is. So me making sure they don't have more kids, like they don't realize I'm doing them such a good favor. And it's a good thing for me too. Like everybody wins. Like a lot of the early eugenicists could probably easily be convincing themselves this was altruistic. Like, I'm doing something. It's almost like if you're training your dog, like you don't want to yell at your dog to make sure that they're housebroken, or if you're breaking in a horse, right? Like maybe I don't want to be mean to the horse. Well, guess what? You're not going to tame a horse unless you know how to be kind of mean in a way, right? So I think that they had that aspect. At least Alexander Graham Bell, it's the way that I have to force it, because he married his wife who was going deaf, and they ran like a school for deaf kids, so like but I can imagine walking up and down, you see all these deaf children, you're just like, man, I love them, but I can't wait till they're all gone and they never come back. That's sort of the premise here. Okay,
well, like outbreed them. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So this is the ERO office, starts in 1910 to keep track of all of these imbeciles and criminals and anyone that catches the wrong side of an ERO agent. Then in 1903, there's also something called the American Breeders Association. Now, when you say that out loud in 2026, you're like, oh, horses and dogs and rabbits. And well, the American Breeders Association literally started for like breeding Americans, the American Breeders Association. It wasn't about horses and rabbits and dogs and stuff. But again, once the eugenics movement got a bad rap, then they start to splinter off, and then now there is a American Breeders Association for dogs and American Breeders for horses. Like it's splinters.
They had to like rebrand with animals because we don't like that with humans anymore.
And if you like doing like puzzles and stuff, this is like the eugenics, American eugenics is kind of like this puzzle where you have to find like, oh, it started as this and it turned into this, just like Kellogg's. You were mentioning, how does Kellogg fit into this? Well, I believe it was called the Battle Creek Sanitarium or something, and he basically created cornflakes as a bland, textured, sort of like unflavored food because he thought that the typical civilian was overloading their senses constantly, and that this was leading to neurosis. There was like a lot of like Freudian theory going into this, but he was basically people are overwhelming their senses and they're becoming sex addicts and drug addicts and they want to drink alcohol and they're into opium, and he just thought that by eliminating any sort of sensation from your life that you could kind of become like a Quaker almost. Like if you just live like a Quaker Amish lifestyle, that you
Oh
could
my
eliminate
God.
neuroses from yourself. So the original invention of cornflakes and of Kellogg's cornflakes, it started as I'm going to feed this to like my patients to get them to chill out, to get them to stop being like sex addicts. I'll give them this really bland food and that'll create a bland personality in them.
Man, he would really have a shit fit with TikTok, wouldn't he?
Or just the fact of how much sugar is now coated on cornflakes, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then you're supposed to like pour more sugar on top of your cornflakes.
He'd be
You know what I
rolling
mean?
in his grave because that's the exact
Oh my goodness.
opposite of what the entire intent of cornflakes was. And on that same length, he believed that all of society was going downhill. There were too many people in the world, that too many dumb people were reproducing. So he wanted people to stop having sex, especially if they had some sort of neuroses, right? Like that means that you should just weed yourself out of the pool to begin with. So that it becomes Kellogg, and he makes all this money off of his cereal, not necessarily from his sanitarium, and no one really bought into his wacky ideas, but they were like, hey, it's a shelf-stable food that poor
Right.
people can eat, and they don't have to have eggs and bacon and don't have to cook or anything. So it becomes a hit overnight, and all of that money, he starts funneling it into these eugenics programs because that's why he created the cereal to begin with. I mean, I'm sure he
Oh
liked
my
being rich on
God.
top of that, but this is where he's like, all right, let me pay it forward.
Dear Jesus. I don't even know where to go with like I don't even know what to say. Like it's like a corrupt not even it's you can't even say necessarily corrupt, but like I want I want utopia of people, therefore I'm going to create it myself by eliminating the undesirables, I guess you could say.
And no one thought this was bad in the early 1900s. Again, it's only Germany that ruins the party for all the American eugenicists to this point. So,
Wow.
and honestly, if you're the victim of one of these forced, compulsory eugenic programs, or even if you're being incentivized, you might, I mean, at an individual level, I'm sure you're not an idiot. You're like, oh, you're going to take my balls. Okay, I guess I'm not having kids. You understand that, but you don't necessarily understand it's like because we want to make sure your genes are no longer on this planet. Like that's the ultimate, and that they're doing it at such a high scale that the individual that's going through the end part of that process, they don't understand how wide this thing is and what like the long-term effect of it's going to be. So okay, so you've got the American Breeders Association, which is a fun rabbit hole to go into. They eventually turned their name into the American Genetic Association, by the way, which sounds way more neutral, right? Like if now it's just about genetic
Sounds
research.
sciencey and medically.
They also splinter off into different parts in Europe and the people working there. So now they're like becoming worldwide. So the ERO originally is one of these that gets more developed because the ERO becomes an actual like state program, and the ERO, the Eugenics Records Office, that starts with a grant from someone named Mary Averill Harriman, and basically it's her mom's got all this money. Her mom is the wife of E.H. Harriman. You don't need to do the full background history lesson, but he was one of the original railroad tycoons. Like E.H. Harriman was one of the big guys. Like you hear the name Rockefeller and Morgan, and maybe to a lesser degree Carnegie. Carnegie was steel. Rockefeller and Morgan were essentially oil and banking, and then Harriman was railroad. Well, the reason you don't hear Harriman is because when's the last time you used the railroad? Probably not as often as oil or steel or money, right? So Harriman, all that money goes to his wife, and then this girl Mary Averill Harriman, she's the one that ends up begging mom like, hey, we need to like start putting money into this thing. She becomes the #1 financier until the Rockefellers take over a few decades later. So she actually creates the ERO with her money, and then this essentially. By the way, she is in the National Women's Hall of Fame. She was inducted in 2015, about 10 years ago, for
what?
her advancements. But because if one of the other weird themes that you'll see is that a lot of these eugenics organizations, a lot of them are in operation today. And even if you go to the Wikipedia page on some of these, they kind of whitewash and gloss over their origins because they've changed their name. And they'll leave all that baggage with the old name that changed in the 1930s, even though it's literally the exact same corporation. The same way that the people that are involved, they become, National Women's Hall of Fame members, even though technically she was behind creating the ERO office that led to 60,000 forced sterilizations.
God. We are a hot mess. All right, then where do we go?
Okay, the Carnegie Institute in 1918, they take over the ERO, again with money from Mary Harriman. She keeps bankrolling all of this. And then we've got a new name that comes onto the scene, Davenport, and he creates this International Federation of Eugenics Organizations, the IFEO. There's a bunch of acronyms. I'm going to go light on them. This is 1925. And the reason why this is important, because another name that he puts on the map, this guy named Eugen Fisher, and he becomes, first of all, he's the chairman of a board that's got one of the weirdest names, the chairman of the Commission on Bastardization and Miscegenation. So it's basically like, if you're an orphan or if you've got some kind of childhood issues, he's like the chairman of this board that oversees problem children and delinquents. And like where the original concept of a juvenile delinquent came from was also like from like children's prisons. So he creates this World Institute that starts making a world map that identifies mixed race areas that you would want to avoid. This is the kind of meme you'd see like right now on Twitter where someone's like, here's the places to never go on vacation, whatever, and they're just being clearly racist about it. Well, this was actually a real thing that was happening exactly 100 years ago, where they were making maps that were saying like, here's all the places to avoid. And he presents this for the very first time in Munich. And this is kind of where a lot of the early German eugenicists start to get on board. They start saying like, oh, we see what you're doing in America. Interesting research. All right, we're paying attention. It's not too far in the process for them. We're still in the late 1920s. We haven't gotten to the 30s yet. So Charles Davenport, the one that creates this whole federation, he's talking with a congressman in the U.S., Albert Johnson, and Albert Johnson makes the Immigration Act of 1924. And the Immigration Act, I mean, like we are still dealing with ramifications of this original Immigration Act. Here's a direct line from Albert Johnson, who was the co-sponsor of that act. Here's what he originally wrote. And it's basically the context is this is what he wants to prevent. And here's how he describes it. A stream of alien blood with all of its inherited misconceptions, respecting the relationships of the governing power to be governed. So he's basically saying that this alien blood, this stream of alien blood, his words, not mine, are coming into this country and not respecting the boundaries, not respecting the laws. And therefore, we need this Immigration Act. We need to be able to determine who gets to come into the country and who doesn't. So this, it sounds common sense, but what happens is that the exact same criteria that they're determining if you're allowed in the country or not is the imbecile test, right? It's like, hey, do you know what this badminton racket looks like?
Right,
and again,
right. So we're right back to square one.
Well, what you can see, though, is that it's starting to develop. So now the government has a tool. Someone made them a hammer, and they're like, hey, look, here's this hammer that hammers and nails. Well, the original nails were criminals and imbeciles, but now the nails become immigrants that are coming into the country. So it's like the hammer doesn't change, but the nails might change a little bit, and they just keep, using this tool over and over again. So here's where it works its way into the Immigration Act of 1924. And this Immigration Act is one of the main inspirations that Germany starts to look at as, oh, not only are all these American scientists big on this eugenics topic, but here's how they're enacting it at a state level. They've got compulsory sterilization laws. They've got immigration laws that prevent you from even entering their country. And in cases, maybe like kicking you out of the country if you're not passing these tests. So again, Germany's like, they're not doing anything yet, but they're sitting back to like, okay, like keep cooking. Like
taking
go ahead
notes,
and cook and let me see what you got. Yeah, they're taking notes. So Davenport remains this this ardent supporter of eugenics even throughout World War II. Even as the Nazis are like in full swing, he's still like, I'm still for this eugenics stuff. So he retires in 1934, and this basically passes the reins onto the Carnegie Institute. So here's where the money really starts to come. First, it came from the Harrimans. And with Davenport at the helm, he's kind of like the manager, not the CEO or the owner. And then it gets passed to Carnegie. And Carnegie continues to fund these eugenics programs at a place called Cold Harbor Spring all the way up until like 1940. So
Well, what would be the investment? Like, what's the ROI on that? Why would I invest in eugenics? Is there a business model on it? Is there something that he's getting back from it?
I mean, I'm gonna have to make some assumptions on my part on this one because you can't necessarily crawl in someone's brain and figure out what their true incentives are behind all this. So the one that I speculate is that they've got more money than God. They can buy anything they want, islands, companies, people. Like they have so much money that it no longer has value to them. So now it's like, well, I can do this to make sure that the world is better for my great grandchildren. So again, they might, even if it's not altruism for the planet, it's at least altruism for their legacy. And there was a few different points of this. One was the overpopulation. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Idiocracy.
Yes.
Okay. I mean,
yes.
dude, Idiocracy
It's coming true, by the way. It's coming true. We're literally wearing the Crocs too.
This early 1900s eugenics programs, they're basically passing around the movie Idiocracy, and they're like, we need to stop this from happening, and we actually have the law on our side that says we're allowed to do it, and we've got the money to make all of this happen. So it's really, I mean, Idiocracy is like a comedy, kind of this like post-apocalyptic dystopian thing, but that was literally the premise was, if we let these dumb people keep reproducing, they're going to ruin the world, and then no one's going to know how to grow plants anymore because they're all going to try and water it with, electrolytes or whatever with Gatorade.
Mountain Dew.
So if you're asking what's the incentive, that's one of the big ones, is that they're trying to prevent idiocracy from happening. And then on the other angle of it too, this is a really easy way to eradicate just people that they don't want to exist. I mean, on a very deeper level, where they just want to eradicate entire groups of peoples, even if it's not necessarily from the world. They can get rid of them from a city. They sure as hell they can put an ERO office in your city and start funding people to go out and pick people off the street and give them IQ tests, and then have a legal justification for compulsory sterilization, which again happened to over 60,000 people until they ended the program in the 70s. And I think a lot of that's front loaded. A lot of those 60,000 were early on, not necessarily towards the tail end.
Right.
Okay, so we're getting to the big event here, which is Germany coming into the picture. And that's why I had to bring up Eugen Fischer, because he's the one that takes over the helm from Davenport. And Eugen Fischer was not an American. He was a German professor of anthropology and medicine, and a very active member of the Nazi Party. So you can see that once the Americans pass the torch to Fischer, he takes that torch and he brings it into the Nazi Party, and he's like, look what I've got. And he's at the helm of this kind of internationally. So he's writing about human heredity and eugenics and all these ideas that he got from the Americans. When Adolf Hitler is locked up and he's writing Mein Kampf, one of the books that he reads is Fischer's work on eugenics, and that becomes his like notion of this perfect Aryan society, and he bakes that into Mein Kampf. So like Mein Kampf is equal parts economics and like socio-political, theory, but then there's like this whole eugenics aspect. Well, that primarily comes from Fischer, and Fischer wouldn't exist without Davenport, and Davenport wouldn't exist without the Harriman brothers, E.H. Harriman, and the Carnegie Foundation. So here you've got a direct lineage of America to Germany.
I was gonna say, when they say, if you could go back in time and change anything, a lot of people are like, oh, I'd go back to Hitler, and
Kellogg, you take out the cornflakes guy, and all this goes away.
Like, wait, we gotta go further. I would have never known that. I like just out of pure ignorance would have thought that Hitler kind of came up with that concept all on his own in terms of like, the Jews bad, this bad, that bad. We should just get rid of you, right? Because you're just bad. Like I would have assumed I didn't know he was kind of fed that information in a sense.
I don't think he was an ideas guy. I think he was an administrator. He knew how to delegate jobs to other people, but I don't necessarily think that he had all these original thoughts. Even Mein Kampf is just sort of a I don't even want to make this analogy, but it's already in my head. But it's like, I am not trying to compare Manly Palmer Hall to Adolf Hitler. I don't even know if you know who that is, but Manly Palmer Hall basically amalgamated all these different teachings from all these different writers, and he puts it together in one big book, and it's extensive. And a lot of people are like, oh man, he knew all this stuff. Like, I mean, yeah, he knew it because he read it, but he didn't sit down and come up with all these ideas and write this huge book. He's putting together like a greatest hits album, right? He's like a DJ a little bit. And I think that that's kind of what it was like DJ Adolf Hitler. Like he's kind of putting together all the greatest hits into this one book, and he calls it Mein Kampf, which is like my struggle. But really it was like other people's ideas that he gets put into this thing. So
oh my goodness.
He's such a fan of Fisher's work that Fisher ends up working for the Nazi Party. And one of the first things that he does is they analyze 600 children, and not German children, of course, not Bavarians, but they were French children of French African soldiers. So they had a type that they were looking at. And wouldn't you know that out of these 600 kids, they were like, okay, we have a problem here. Like we need to do something about this. And this is like the very beginning of like that snowball starting to pick up steam inside of Germany. They see America doing it. They see America passing laws. Now the research is here in the heart of Germany, inside Nazi Germany. And now they're like, all right, let's experiment a little bit. And one of those early experiments, by the way, if you're into cosmetics, what is it, cosmetology or whatever, that there's a scale that they still use to measure the color of your hair, from a scale from like blonde to brown to black and red and all this. And it's called the Fisher-Solar scale, I believe. That's this Fisher. So if you go and look at the Fisher-Solar scale, which is just a bunch of pieces of hair on like a little ruler that tells you how blonde you are, the Fisher of that Fisher-Solar scale is this Nazi eugenicist, which his name is still associated in cosmetics.
That's almost, I don't know if I would be proud of that. You know what I mean? To even utilize that. I mean, I guess, because I know in terms of Nazi Germany, like a lot of medical science came from that they were doing, and we just kind of like took the results from them. We're like, okay, you already did bad things, but we're going to take your results and utilize that, going forward. But I mean, it's kind of almost embarrassing that we even did that.
All right, I'll start to speed this up a little bit, because now that we're in the Reichstag, they passed similar laws where they're, again, modeled after American laws. So the first one was the law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring. That was in 1933, and that was based on, again, Lawlon's model that the United States had enacted in Indiana and pushed out. So for Nazi Germany, on that first year that they enact this, they sterilize, the numbers are anywhere between 35,000 and 80,000. So technically Germany sterilizes more people the first year based on what we were doing than we have on record for all 70 years. So they're very prolific. The stats can go up as high as 350,000, but they themselves only documented up to 80,000. So depending on
they weren't messing around. Yeah, they weren't.
And I mean, you're gonna think like, okay, does not attack the whole premise that America had a bigger eugenics program and all this? Well, that's when the abortions are gonna probably have to come into play,
carry over,
because we have more people, so the numbers are gonna start to explode on that. But again, we're gonna leave abortion to the side just for a second. So there was another eugenics organization, and it was called the Pioneer Fund. We're back in America, if you can't tell, the Pioneer Fund. And the first president of the Pioneer Fund was this guy called Wycliffe Draper, and he was there from 1937 to 1941. So this is an organization that's happening during the Nazi eugenics experiment that's happening for the world to see. Someone's like, you know what we need? We need a new fund, but we can't call it the Eugenics Fund or the Eugenics Office or the Breeders example. So we're going to call it the Pioneer Fund, which now when I hear it, it's like the Patriot Act, the Pioneer Fund.
Right.
Like, who's going to be against the Pioneer Fund, right?
Right. Let's make it sound like American. Ugh.
So of the people that promote this Pioneer Fund include Edward House and also a name who's Woodrow Wilson's foreign policy advisor. Woodrow Wilson ends up being the president, fun fact, during 1913 when the Federal Reserve gets passed. So he's kind of in tight with the same cliques of people that are essentially funding all these eugenics programs. So he's one of them. Here's the other interesting aspect is that usually when the names say like Carnegie comes up, it's usually like the Carnegie Endowment Fund. Like if you're watching PBS or NPR, it's like, oh, and thank you to the Carnegie Endowment Fund for making this program possible. Well, they have this migration in the early 20th century when now they have to do some PR campaigns because it's getting a little bit of flack for this whole eugenics thing. It's starting to take a little bit of a turn. So they become more involved in philanthropy. And now it's not necessarily like we're funding eugenics because we want to weed the world out. It's like, oh, do you have some sort of issues? Do you need some help planning your family? Do you need some help? Like you're going to be a parent? Like we can help you plan that out. Like this is where the line starts to shift a little bit towards we're philanthropists. We're doing this for charity. This is all for you. This isn't for us. We've just got all this money and we need to help you out. So it's the exact same things that they're doing, but it's completely being phrased as like, you want this and I'm doing this for you. So this is where Kellogg is involved in this. All the Carnegies are involved in this. Here's another crazy name that's going to come up. So 1927 in America, before World War II, before the Nazis take this out of control, this guy named William Shockley, who is one of the founders of Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley is going to come up in this eugenics thing too. Because again, it said this started before Germany, during Germany, which I think we've already covered a little bit, and way after Germany. So one of the founders of Silicon Valley, this is a guy that he grew up, he went to Hollywood High School, he went to Caltech, and then he ends up going to MIT in the 30s, and he becomes part of the War Department. But through this, and if you go into like, there's so many tangents here, but he also, because he's with the War Department and he's got Caltech degrees and he's got a PhD from MIT, he ends up working on the transistor, and the transistor is tightly coupled with like the UFO sightings and UFO discoveries and stuff. So
what is the transistor? Is that like a...
The transistor, essentially, it can operate as either an amplifier or it's in like every single radio, like a transistor radio.
Oh, it's
the way that you would tune into stations and the way that you can affect the volume, like all of that is made possible through this transistor, which was hard to overstate how important the transistor was. This is what gives us every computers and microchips and everything. Therefore, that's why he's kind of one of the founders of before Silicon Valley existed. Like he created the transistor first, and he gets like the Nobel Prize. He's highly regarded. So for the first, like, I don't know, like 40 or 50 years of his life, after all this goes through, he decides that he's going to become sort of a like armchair geneticist, and he gets real deep into all of this eugenics stuff. The problem though is that he gets into this in like the late 40s into like the 1950s. So it's like, my guy, we've moved on. We're not allowed to talk about eugenics being good anymore. You kind of missed the boat. But he ends up becoming one of these big proponents of it. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because he starts to cite older eugenics research up until like the 50s and the 60s, kind of reinvigorating and exposing that a lot of these programs are still enacted. So he's because he was the creator of the transistor and because he worked for the War Department, he's got all these credentials. People are listening to him and not necessarily realizing that he didn't get a PhD in genetics. He got a PhD in like engineering and electronics, right? But now he's talking about this, and he starts bringing up there was a case at the time in early 1960s. This guy named Rudy Hoskins, who was a 17-year-old black kid that threw acid into like a white lady's face or something. So he takes this instance as like time to bring out the eugenics talk and get this going again. And since he's got all of this attention on him for inventing the transistor, then it kind of just like reasserts itself as, oh, the high level elite society, like they're still in this, like they're still want to fund this. So he loses a little bit of credibility when he does this, but he also gains a lot of friends that were sort of like, hey, we're still into this too. So here's one of the
They all start coming out of the woodworks.
Yeah, they all the eugenicists come out of the woodworks because they're like, my guy, you know, like my brother in Christ kind of thing, like the mean aspect. So
we can talk about this now.
he brings up again the IQ test, and he specifically states that anybody that scores under 100 on an IQ test should have a voluntary vasectomy for $1,000. So you get sterilized for $1,000, which was a decent amount of money in the 1960s, right? So again, here's the exact same program that was enacted 60 years prior. Had like, hey kid, you want to make $200? You know, just never have kids again. He's doing this, but he's advertising it to like the entire scientific community, like the global community of essentially like electronic nerds and stuff at this point. So it's kind of, this is the first time that the concept of eugenics outside of Germany, where it's getting a real bad rap, now it's back in America, and it's like, hey, it's not that bad. Look, you can make $1,000, and you know, it's not the same thing that's happening over there. Again, reinforcing that the American model for eugenics was more incentivized.
Did they try to push the idea of like help with population overload, you know, help with resources, like you're doing your part to society by
No, they were idiots and imbeciles. They wouldn't understand.
But I mean, were they saying that outward to society? Like, do you know an imbecile? Send them to us. Like help our, you know what I mean? Like help your country do better so that we, you know, help decrease population. We're over. I don't know, like propaganda in that aspect. That's what I could imagine.
I think that pitch is more for hey, we're doing this, and if you want to help, send money here. Here's where to send the donation. So, you know, if you're a Rockefeller or a Carnegie and you've got hundreds of millions of, you know, billions of dollars, you're not going to the bank and taking out money and going door to door. You're just going to put this into an organization, and they'll hire the people to do it. And that's essentially what we're describing, all these different organizations and offices and Pioneer Fund and Eero Office. So it actually, before it gets all the way to Germany, there was one particular case that happened in the United States, which caused some people reading papers to be like, wait a minute, this might not be great. So the first documented controversial case, it was called Buck versus Bell. This is 1927. And basically there was this girl named Carrie Buck. And this is, quote, she was a probable potential parent of socially inadequate offspring. That's from the court documents. So they're kind of precogging her of like, because her mom was a whore and her mom had her as, you know, like out of wedlock and didn't know who the dad was, could have been 3 or 4 different dads. And they were worried that Carrie was going to do the exact same thing because she also had a kid out of wedlock. It comes out later that she got raped by her cousin, so it wasn't really her fault. But in the eyes of the law, it was like, here's a problem. Like your mom's no good, you're no good. I bet you your daughter's not going to be any good. So let's go ahead and nip this thing in the bud before it gets out of control. And long story short, they rule against her. She gets compulsory sterilized. So even though that they try to bring up like, oh, this isn't right, and one of and I believe this gets all the way up to like a Supreme Court ruling, and it was an 8-1 decision, and one of the 8 on that decision was a Chief Justice named Taft, who ends up becoming a United States president, who also, by the way, was one of the original members of the Skull and Bones Secret Society, which also has ties to all these same eugenics programs, funders, and everything. So again, there's like this trend that keeps coming up, and I only have to point that out because I'm a conspiracy theorist, but like these are facts. Like he was Chief Justice in the Buck versus Bell in 1927. That was Taft, and he becomes like a large proponent of the eugenics as well. So America eugenics is going pretty swimmingly for this. And then 1927, that same Fisher, the one that inspires Adolf Hitler and Mein Kampf, he becomes a speaker at the World Population Conference in Switzerland. And this World Population Conference, this is essentially a precursor to the UN. Like all of the same people that
Mhm.
show up to this conference that keep coming time and time again, they have originally become the United Nations, the League of Nations, and this is where Margaret Sanger comes into the picture, which is the Planned Parenthood name. So it's at this because in Switzerland now it's not just the Americans thing, and this is before the Nazis have actually started enforcing it at the state level. So it's kind of neutral. It's still like, oh, this is cool, novel science. So like smart, altruistic people are doing this. And that's where Margaret Sanger jumps into this thing. And this entire operation was basically organized with the funds of Margaret Sanger's husband, which never gets any mention. Everyone talks about Margaret Sanger, where her husband's kind of bankrolling this guy, Noah Slee. And along with Noah Slee's donation, this is where the Rockefeller Foundation were like, we'll cover the rest of the tab. And they keep paying the tab for the next like 20 or 30 years. So here's where we're basically at, where Germany on their own track end up being inspired by Fisher. Fisher ends up inspiring the rest of the world, including Margaret Sanger, which then starts Planned Parenthood. So like he's a linchpin in this. But again, he comes from this lineage of Lawlin and Davenport and then Fisher.
I don't.
I got some good questions for you. Here's some fun ones, right? So out of all of the states in the United States, all 50 states, what state do you think sterilized far more people than any other state in the country?
Well, you mentioned it started in Indiana, right?
Right. Yep.
I'm gonna just go best guess with Indiana.
It wasn't Indiana. What's the state you would least expect to have been the biggest on eugenics?
I'm gonna go for the South.
So I'll just skip. We don't have to bounce around, but it was California. The
really?
state of California sterilized far more people than any other state, and if you go into eugenics research leading up to Nazi Germany, it is the number one state referenced as an example that the Nazis used in America. Look how well it worked for them in California. Therefore, so a lot of people in California might not be happy to know that it was their eugenic program that ultimately got cited the most. I'm not going to say that it was California that caused it. It was clearly America that caused it in general. But California was the example that they were using in all of their reports.
It sounds like it worked out for the worst because California is like a hot mess. You know what I mean?
They ended it, right? They ended it pretty early.
Yeah, but if you start getting rid of the genetics, then that's not going to carry over. We should have already that line, the lineage should have already been out, and California should be thriving by now.
Okay, so I already mentioned the numbers where the Germans were very prolific. They got up to like 80,000 on their records, but 350,000 based on everyone else's records just for the sterilization program. And that also, by the way, does include people that were euthanized, that were just straight up murdered. The original, that was called the T4 Action Program, which is where they basically rounded up all of their mentally deficient, their cripples, their anyone that would have fit into like these schizophrenic categories, anyone that had a disability or a disease goes in one of those first waves. That's part of that initial like 350,000. But after that happens, Germany, and after they lose the war, their eugenics program kind of ends after those few years when they were very prolific. But they have a much smaller population. They don't have a lot of immigration of people flooding into the country for obvious reasons.
Right.
And also they're not necessarily going through an abortion program because like they'll just kill you and your family. They're not going to worry about like a medical procedure. And if you're of Aryan descent, or if you're one of the, the ones that don't get rounded up, you're probably not going to have an abortion because you're trying to, stock the numbers with like your race or whatever. So, and they also, I don't believe they're actually keeping track of abortions. They had bigger things to deal with at this point. So once you start adding in immigration, the effect of immigration on eugenics, it's easy to overlook because it doesn't have all the shock and awe of like, they're castrating people and they're murdering people. But if you just prevent someone from a certain country from entering your country, well, they're not going to be able to reproduce with anyone in your country. So that alone becomes a much more effective than anything Germany could have done. And that's just the immigration program that starts in 1924 and technically is still happening right now in 2026, right? Like 100 years later, we still have some, maybe not as strongly enforced, but we have immigration policy that started with this like eugenics program. Then we have to absolutely talk about the Margaret Sanger aspect of this. Once you add in the concept of abortions, which unequivocally, like there's, I don't think any debate whatsoever that Margaret Sanger's original intentions with Planned Parenthood were for eugenics. Like it was never for family planning and making sure that poor families weren't burdened by something they couldn't handle. That was not the incentive of the original Planned Parenthood. It was eugenics. And once you calculate those numbers in, the expanded count goes from the 60,000 forced sterilizations in the American eugenics programs to over 24 million once you include the abortion numbers. And even on a good day, Germany, with the highest estimates that have come up, in addition to all of their other euthanasia and sterilization, I think they max out at around like 7 million. It's like 7.7 million if you include 700,000 of the forced sterilization program over all those different years. So compare Germany's entire, and this is all the way up until 2021, I think we've got records for also their abortion numbers. So if you include all forced sterilizations, all euthanasia, and all abortions in Germany versus the United States, Germany's got 7.7 million and America's got 24 million. So it's not even close if you were to compare the two of them. Now, if you only want to count people that were forcefully euthanized or forcefully sterilized, then Germany wins for like 3 years in a row. And that's it. Every other year on record, America wins. But the second you include abortions, Germany's not even in the race anymore. They're not even in the top 10.
You're so fucked. I don't even know where to go with, like, I don't even know, like, why did we never fight this? Why did we let this happen?
Well, why? A better question: why is it still happening? Why are we still allowing this to happen even right now?
Well, because we have the propaganda saying like, oh, well, you're not ready to be a mom, or it's family. It's led in a positive light, right? That propaganda of like, you know, you're not ready, or whatever, or I don't know, all these unreasonable things. So they lead with this positive, like, you have a whole life to live. You want to go to college. You want to do this. We even see that Planned Parenthood with their birth control, right? You can even get a 5-year plan with that. I think there's something you put in your arm, like you get a 5-year plan. But
can you expand on that? I've never heard of that before.
It's something that they put in your arm, and I think it, like, you could get it. You could have it in there for up to 5 years as birth control, right?
Oh, like a 5-year slow release.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 5 years. I could be wrong. I don't know. I never did it, but I'm pretty sure that was like the option.
So, I mean, it's really hard to figure out where's the line between Margaret Sanger wanting to sterilize you so you don't have black babies versus giving a black woman a shot that makes her sterile for 5 years. It's almost like they're microdosing eugenics, you know?
Delay it until she's not capable of having babies, or make it, oh my God, that would be it. Because that's the issue right now. That's the biggest chief complaint I hear from most pro-life. You know, I would consider myself definitely in a pro-life concept, but that's the biggest chief complaint is, especially from our right-winger Christian nationalists type of people, we would hear them say women should be having babies when they're young, right? 18 to 25, right? That's the best time you could reproduce, you know, as an adult. And the older you get, the bigger problem you have trying to get pregnant later. And then you might have to do IVF. You might have to pay a lot of money out for this, for that, whatever. So in essence, if I could convince a young woman to delay having children, because go to college, travel, live your life, have a good life, have fun, and keep her on birth control for 10 years, So then by the time she's 28 and finally ready to have children, now it's even harder for her to. So I decrease her chances of having a bunch of imbeciles.
And now imagine, which I don't think happens yet, but imagine they were like, and here's $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
So like once that financial incentive, although I believe that just because of the last like 30 or 40 years of progressive politics, even though that's largely the ones that are proponents of pro-choice and abortion clinics and all of that, it's still kind of frowned upon to offer a financial incentive in addition to it. So it's just a free service for now, but they could potentially offer you money. And I mean, tinfoil hat back on, but there are like some of those like secret videos where someone captured where they're basically like negotiating how much for fetal cells or whatever it is. So like there probably are still financial incentives. So it's like two birds, one stone. Like you don't want a kid. I don't want you to have a kid. And also I want your stem cells so that, you know, I can live another 2 years or my wife can have like a better complexion or whatever it is that they use it for. It's kind of like win-win for everybody all around. So it again, I think that it's really hard to determine like Margaret Sanger's version of I don't want more black babies. That's eugenics. But what is this? Is this eugenics or is it just, you know, helping you plan your family, helping you figure out a better realistic life for yourself where you're not going to be financially burdened? It's really hard to put your finger exactly where it's at on that whole scale.
Well, I think it's bullshit. So, and also out to the viewers, if you want to come on for the Q&A, I've dropped the link into the chat. You're welcome to go ahead and head backstage. I'll bring you guys up in a minute. I've got like a gazillion questions at this point. I look at it this way, right? The only people that need to be told how to family plan are people who weren't taught how to family plan by their family. So my market, right? If I want to get people in the door for family planning, my market is what you would consider maybe the imbeciles or the undesirables, people who have poor family systems, right? Either parents left or they're
you could summarize all this too as just poor financially. Because if you have money, you can hire a nanny that takes care of all that for you.
Right. Or even at that, like you're already set. The next family step is to have a family, right? There, you don't have to worry about planning it. It's just meet man, make babies, move forward. I feel like that's kind of like something I would consider to be more for the elites in an aspect where it's like, oh, well, the poor economically challenged, the inner city, the this, the that. We don't want them to try to have babies right now because they're in a hot mess. Why do we want hot mess making more hot mess? And then it's more for us to have to deal with later. And if they're the ones that are always breeding because they're acting out, being stupid, like not smart, thinking ahead, I think it's like most people that make the most kids are poor, right? I think statistically,
idiocracy,
yeah, and it's because they're not responsible. It's because they're not planning ahead. It's because they're not thinking this through. So why not like try to solve that problem for them? Like, hey, you can go out and be stupid all you want, but we're gonna give you this little pill. You take it, every day, and it's gonna prevent you from having to worry about the consequences of your action. You don't want a baby right now. We want a family plan. We want to wait until you've gone out, done all your stupid stuff, and then sit down and have kids, right?
Well, so here's another interesting dynamic that if you talk about eugenics and remove humans from the equation, let's talk about literally anything else. Let's talk about dogs. It's not, I mean, there's some people that are against dog breeding and like overbreeding and stuff, but for the most part, no one is trying to start international movements to prevent eugenics within dogs or eugenics within corn or eugenics within literally any other type of living being on the entire planet. It's only when it comes to humans. And the only reason that there's this negative connotation is because Germany enacted it on such a wide oppressive level without being voluntary, without having incentive. that it basically ruined it for all of the other eugenics organizations for who knows how many more centuries, essentially. But it's going to kind of be like this bad word where you can't say out loud what you're doing and why you're doing it. You can still do it. You can still open these clinics, and you can still fund all these organizations. And we'll get into like the modern day, like again, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I don't know if you know this, but Bill Gates Sr., he was on the board of Planned Parenthood, I believe. And like the entire premise of the Gates Foundation trying to help world population and starvation issues, and what are the altruistic ones? Like, oh, he's gonna solve AIDS in Africa, or he's gonna prevent like the famine issues that they're having in third world countries and stuff. That all stems from his dad being in this eugenics program as well. And it's not necessarily the pitch. I think the altruistic pitch now is that back in the day, in the 20th century, you might by default decide you're going to have 7 or 8 kids, knowing that you might only get to keep 2 or 3 because you're going to have complications and infant mortality rate. Like, just a lot of things could go wrong in the 1800s and early 1900s. So one wing of this eugenics program was like, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to improve infant mortality rates. We're going to improve child care and medical care. And like, this is the promise of the Rockefeller system, is we're going to make doctors and medicine better. And therefore, you could just give the 1 kid, maybe 2. You don't have to have 7 or 8 because you don't need to worry about 5 of them dying. We're going to make sure that the 2 or 3 you have, they're going to stay living. We're going to have a nice medical system. So that was sort of the carrot versus the stick aspect, was like, hey, don't have as many kids. You can still have kids, don't have as many. But that was, of course, afforded to somebody that had the means in order to do that. But ultimately, I think it's like, it turns into like a class weeding system. And part of the thinking is that the same way that, oh, you're a criminal, you can't help it, you were always going to be a criminal. It's almost like, oh, you're a poor. Well, you were always going to be a poor, and we might as well get your poor genetics out of the genetic pool so that we don't have poor people anymore. And you can see that same exact thinking that originally you were like, no, I could see that. Yeah, get rid of the rapists, get rid of the serial killers. Well, now it's not hard to move that needle to like, okay, now it's going to be anyone of a certain hair color, skin color. Now it's going to be anybody that just doesn't match maybe my like socioeconomic status. So now it's not that I hate you because of this. It's like, I don't want you to make my grandkids poor, so we need to get you out of the system. And it's the exact same mental logic that originally was being planned in the early 1900s.
At what point do we realize that and shut it down? Right. At what point do we realize the goal? And I say that because we're currently on a birth rate decline, right? And we're facing dangerous numbers, so on and so forth. And it's like, we need more people. Do we got to stay stocked, per se, for the betterment of society?
That solves itself, though. That problem solves itself because we're only running out of people to take care of the old people. But once all those old people die, then the problem's gone. You know what I mean? Then if there's another baby boom, then there'll be plenty more kids to take care of their aging parents as time goes on. But it's not that population decline means that humans are going to go extinct or anything. It's just that by the time me and you are in our 90s, or if we make it to 100, there just won't be enough young people on the planet to cater to us, to take care of us. Even if you don't have kids, or if you do have kids, there just won't be enough young people to old people to manage it all. So some old people are going to have to just kind of fizzle off, completely neglected. That's essentially what that dilemma is. But once all those old people die off, the population issue sort of wanes a little bit.
Well, okay. Now I'm seeing a bigger conspiracy, because you're talking about eugenics on the front end, right? Prevent them from having babies. But then on the back end, at the end, when you're getting old and you're, it's like there's not enough people to take care of you, or you're just kind of useless or whatever. If we're okay with killing babies or sterilizing people or so on and so forth, what's to stop us from getting rid of old people when they're just useless? Because we already have MAID up in Canada. I mean, they're like beelining them. They are it's like, hey, you know what? You have problems. You don't want to be here. You know what? Just it's fine. We got the door right here. Come on in, right? It's some point, are we getting so immoral with our boundaries of life and death that we're beelining people to death?
Well, it's those are two different problems that have the same solutions essentially, because you want to kill them. I'm saying this in like the mind of like a eugenicist, so I hope no one like
don't clip him, guys. Preface.
But essentially, it's like you want to kill them young to make sure that they don't pollute your grandkids, and you can kill them when they're old. But when you kill them when you're old, you're not wiping out their genetics. You're just eliminating a burden on society. So the eugenic aspect is making sure that you don't have the old person to be a drain on the society to begin with. But yeah, if you find yourself in that position, not only because early on these eugenics programs, they'd have to pay you $1,000 to sterilize yourself.
Right.
But now at the tail end of your life, if you want to go and get yourself euthanized, you're paying them to do it, and they're getting insurance money, and they're getting funding from probably all sorts of government and pharmaceutical corporations. So like now the incentive, they don't have to worry about paying you. They're like, show up, we'll kill you legally, and we're going to make like probably 5 to 6 figures off of every single time that happens.
Well, okay, but they're, like I said, in Canada, they're even offering it up to people who are they want to unalive themselves. They have bad thoughts. They're terminally ill. They're just mentally, it hurts to be alive. You know, I mean, you could push that button with almost any. I was even we did a whole show on it that if you are poor and you don't want to deal with being poor anymore, you can go to MAID. And it doesn't matter how old you are. Like you just say, you know what? I'm unhappy being poor. I don't like this. I can't afford to survive. I don't like this anymore. I just want to push the button. I mean, we're offering basically eugenics for those who are like feel like they're less than. It's almost like we've just said, we're not even going to tell you you're less than. We're going to let you figure that out for yourself.
Well, yeah, the trick is making it voluntary. That's the way. I mean, you're asking like, what's the solution to stop this? I don't think there's ever going to be a way to stop, because ultimately a forced eugenics program might just be a world war. I mean, that's a real easy way to like forcefully remove a large number of people from the genetic pools. You just have a war and you kill them in war. So that like this is the nicer version of that before you get to that point is a voluntary system. And I guess in this case, it's the exact same logic, because if you're so depressed or if you're so poor that this seems like a viable option to you, then there might be something inherently wrong with you and your genetics that you shouldn't be here. Like we both agree. If you're too depressed and too broke to live on this planet, good. I don't want my grandkids being broke and depressed either. So take, exit stage left, and on the way out, give me your insurance card and we'll ring you up for an extra 10 grand or whatever it is.
The weakest link. We don't want the weakest link. We want, it's kind of, what is it? What was it like? This is Sparta, killing off the.
You know what? Great freaking example. The Spartans were one of the earliest sort of like pro-eugenic societies, where if you had a weakling, they would literally just throw you off a cliff. And over a long enough time, the idea was that you just had a culture of warriors because you've eliminated all them. Here's a tangent on that one. You ever heard the name Charles Lindbergh? So he was a famous pilot in the early 1900s in America. I would say he was like a prototypical like Trump supporter kind of
like
guy.
Lyndon,
I don't mean that as a pejorative. I mean like the guy that gets up and everyone's like, hell yeah, that's an American hero. Let's listen to what this guy has to say. He was famous for the Spruce Goose, which was like an all wooden plane, I think, that he made. I think that was Charles Lindbergh, or that might have been Howard Hughes. But Charles Lindbergh, the first scandal that he was part of was called or his child ends up missing and getting kidnapped and later found dead, I believe. And there was like all these theories of, was it the housekeeper or was it like one of the groundskeepers that like snuck into this kid's room? One of the more interesting conspiracy theories on this was that Charles Lindbergh, his own kid, was like feeble-minded, or he had some sort of a mental deficiency that was obvious to anyone in the family, and that Charles Lindbergh was such a staunch eugenicist that he decided to kind of take things into his own hands, and that he was the one that made sure that his own kid didn't survive in a very Spartan way, and in a way of like, I can't let this represent my legacy, so let's go ahead and nip this thing in the bud. So like, just there's examples of people doing it for their own reason. Like he wanted his own legacy to have this eugenic flair to it. Now just extrapolate that to, what if it's the entire institution? What if it's the entire government that has that same mentality, and they want to enact it on all their civilians? It's no longer like you're deciding within your own family or with your own body.
Okay. Now, what if it works?
Well, I think it does work.
Like, in a way, I mean, no, I mean, what if it works in a positive manner? Because I don't see society getting like fruitful and everyone's rich. Like if we, that's why they call it the 1%, right? Because everybody else is way less than, economically. Our culture, even here in America, it's like we're running amok. We've got prison systems that are corrupt. We've got criminals that are re-killing, like doing stuff again and again and again. We got judges that are letting people go. We got this, we got that. We've got OnlyFans. We've got, everything's just in haywire. It feels like we're living in hell almost to some degree. With
we're not eating enough cornflakes.
We're not eating enough cornflakes. We're overstimulated. We got TikTok. We got TikTok brains. We've got everybody's on social media. Everybody's watching TV. Like everybody's just laying around doing absolutely nothing worth a damn. Like, what if, and this is just me playing this direction, what if we went the route of eugenics and it made it to where you had to pass a test, and made it to where there was a requirement, and made it to where we stopped people from reproducing based off of like some kind of standard concept, whether it be a test or requirements, whatever. What if we did? Would America actually get better? Would we only have good people? Would we only have the best of the best left over? No, did I lose you?
Am I back?
Yes, there you are. Or at least you were. You're still frozen. I froze him. It was such a terrible question. I froze him. While he's going in and out, I'm going to go ahead and bring up, I've got Ben and it looks like Spin hanging backstage. Bring you guys up. If you do want to join in on the conversation, I feel like this is definitely more Q&A style than it is anything else, because I couldn't imagine anyone arguing this, by the way, but I'm trying to play the other side. So my question to you, I don't know how much of it you heard, but my question to you is, what if we did go strict on eugenics and we did have a standard test or some kind of requirement for people to pass and have in order to be able to reproduce? What if we did outbreed the imbeciles? And I say that with quotations. What would happen to America? Would we be this better place? Would we all be smart, financially responsible, great parents? Would it be like was that why the 1950s was so good?
I think it was more limited media exposure of like the bad parts. You get more happy days than anything else when you get to look back on like the nostalgic aspect. But I think the ultimate problem is, if again, the whole reason that you look into the early 1900s is that all the money comes from like 4 or 5 main sources. And one of those sources, Carnegie and Rockefeller, both associated with all sorts of education endowments. And the education endowments are the ones that go to the schools that determine if you can get a license or a degree, if you're smart enough to operate in society, and they're going to be the ones that are writing the tests that determine if you're an idiot or not. So if the very people that want to enact eugenics are the ones writing the tests, then it's really hard. Like it would almost have to be some like triple blind way of qualifying people, but like, do we really have those kind of resources to start enacting that? And could you really trust anyone to put together like a legitimate eugenics test that no one can like put their thumb on the scale?
Well, but what would the world look, or I mean, at least America, what would we look like? I mean, I don't envision like Nazi Germany, right? I don't envision it being that way, but like, what would be the outcome? How would we?
I think right now we've got like, if you've heard of CRISPR, or CRISPR, if I oversimplify it, it's like you get to pick your own DNA, you know, or if a more practical version, if you go and have a kid and they can determine, well, if we use this egg and this sperm, then it'll create this baby. And maybe you want that one instead of this other one. So like the more you get to have like a designer baby, that is sort of the 21st century version of eugenics on an individual scale, when like you get to decide what baby you want out of all the babies you could potentially have. But then it's like, what if they're only presenting you with the options that the hospital wants you to be able to select from? Like maybe you had an option of 50 variations, but they're only showing you 3 because they've determined these other 47 are going to be a strain on society, and you don't get to pick from those.
Yeah, okay, where's the morality or like the back and forth on that one? You know, if I have all of these options, but then they only limit me to what they think is best, then am I even being given the parental rights of deciding what is best for my child who hasn't even been born yet? See, now this goes back into the abortion piece, where you would fight the abortion piece on when is life, right? At what point can you abort, whatever. But those are my eggs. That's my husband's sperm. Why would that hospital have the right to tell me which one they're going to choose, you know, or tell me like my limited amount of options and just saying the rest of them were just bad, you didn't want them, right? How do we know?
That one was going to be that one's going to grow up to be a Ben Balderson, so we're not going to show him that option.
Right. But I mean, yeah, so we're running into CRISPR. Now we have a designer baby potential. I also know that they were able to do something where what is it? Down syndrome. They're able to kind of knock out Down syndrome on early on in genetics, right?
Well, I think that they can identify it, which ultimately just means like, we're not going to go with that one next, which is kind of like again, on the scale of abortion, if it hasn't even been fertilized yet, and you're already like, we're not going to fertilize that one, that is definitely eugenics, but it's not necessarily abortion, but it is like planning parenthood. It is like part of the
it's playing God. You're playing God. You're playing God though, and that's the piece behind it all, is I get to decide, right? So pair CRISPR with abortion, with eugenics. I essentially like the beginnings of it. Like I at the rate we're going and with what our country is experiencing, I wouldn't be surprised if that eugenics like somehow squeaked its way back in as a side piece somehow, like unknowingly.
It's already here. It's just never going to be called eugenics again. It's going to be called mental health. It's going to be called Planned Parenthood. It's going to be called like all sorts of different altruistic sounding things. It's never ever going to be called eugenics again, because Germany ruined that particular word, but the practice hasn't changed. Like for example, like you mentioned the Bill and Melinda Gates. This is a direct quote from a TED talk that Bill Gates gave in 2010. If you want to look it up and verify it, it's because this quote is so crazy sounding. You'd be like, he didn't say that. It's the talk is called Innovating to Zero. Bill Gates 2010 TED Talk. This is his quote. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed to be about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we can lower that by perhaps 10 to 15%. So it's weird because you're like, okay, if we improve healthcare, why would improving healthcare mean 15% less world population? Right? Like, how does better healthcare equal a 15% drop in the world population? We're talking about 15% of 9 billion people. So he's like, if we do our jobs right, we can eliminate 1 billion people off of this planet. That sounds crazy. It sounds crazy for someone to say that out loud. And again, that's because the premise is that if we improve healthcare, then you don't have to have 4 kids. You can just have 1 kid, or maybe have no kids, depending on if you can afford this, procedures they want to put forth. The Gates Foundation has contributed over $1 billion to these different programs just over the last 10 years. So the amount that they are donating now is basically on the same level as what the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the Sangers and the Harrimans were all donating in the early 1900s. So again, like, the program has not changed. The name of it has changed, but the program hasn't. And now it's just expanded. Now a lot of the eugenics programs are just happening in third world countries. They're not necessarily happening on the streets of America as much.
All right, gentlemen, I will let you go into inquiry. I am so intrigued by this. My brain is melting. So maybe I should let one of you take over. But either of you is fine.
The physical aspects, like Down syndrome children, kids that are going to be, one of the other things that you see. And I believe Japan said that they've gotten a grip on that. And then obviously things like the cancer gene that they're saying and editing those outside of the physical representations. And you somewhat touched on it with the intelligence. One of the things post World War II that was an interesting study was the Milgram experiment. And in the end of for people that don't know, the Milgram experiment was basically how far will people take authority? And it was a very interesting study. Well, in the experiment, the things that they were doing to check authority were harming another person. It wasn't actually happening, but that's what they were making it look like, and seeing if the person would do things that were morally unconscionable under the guise of authority and how they felt about that. Now, the end result of that experiment, the percentage of people that did not chose to not do it, they called the rebel gene. And they specifically said that they thought that they could breed the rebel gene out of society. How much do you think that is impacting what we're talking about?
Wait, you were telling me about the rebel gene. This was a while back okay, yes. All right, I'm tracking. Sorry. Yeah.
I think that's very possible. In fact, I mean, depending on how deep you want to get in conspiracy lore, but there's also some angles where that particular gene, it might not be a hereditary thing, that you can trigger that in almost anyone. For example, I believe it was like people that have induced births, they might have some sort of like a rebel gene from the environment, not necessarily from their genetics, implanted to them, because it gives like a fighting nature of this, like, the world is against you on like a very deep traumatic level. So to be able to weed it out, but I think that you can always reinstill it. I don't think you can count on, like, let's not let that guy, like, we're gonna give that guy a vasectomy on the way out because he didn't let the doctor push the button and electrocute the guy. Like, taking him out, I think it's so much easier to create rebels than it would be to try and weed the rebels out. I think one of the biggest proponents for, or the incentives for, like, the elite class to want to have eugenics enacted, and this is one, is that in dementia praecox, another thing that was happening right around the exact same time that all of these different eugenics programs, is that they were dementia praecox was this umbrella term for schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, extreme depression, just any kind of really major mental issue. And what they were realizing is that, like, I'm rich, I've got all these doctors on call, I've got all the resources in the world, but I can't fix my 20-year-old, kid that's supposed to carry on my legacy. And this is a real problem because I'm 60 now and I can't have any more kids. So, like, I'm screwed. My family line is screwed because my kid's starting to go crazy. And they realized that this wasn't something they could just throw money at. And ultimately they realized, like, this is because someone in my genetic lineage banged a crazy person and they screwed it up for everybody. So now, like, we're done. But if we start eliminating people that have mental disorders, then that'll guarantee that my grandkids won't have mental disorders, and I don't have to worry about that. I think if you just extrapolate that to a level, so it's not like the rebel gene from the Milgram experiment as much as it is like making sure that guy does not have children that can reproduce with your children way outside of whatever he's acting like. And by just as to throw a little salt in there too, I think the Milgram experiment's a sham. I don't think that you can rely on that at all.
They say that they've replicated it numerous times.
I know they have, but I think here's the fatal flaw with Milgram is that the premise is that they're basically having them electrocute someone and gives them so much voltage that you would die from it. And they hear the person screaming like, stop, I'm dying, whatever. And then they stop making noise. And the premise is like, well, if there's an authority figure with a lab coat that keeps telling you proceed, that the operation must continue, or whatever it is they say. But if they're literally killing a person, it's almost like you assume that the doctor would also be going to jail, and whoever set up this experiment would be going to jail. Like, if I'm sitting there hitting this button, I think that there's an extra expectation. Like, of course, this guy's not dying in the next room, because otherwise the doctor, the side of me, would be sweating, bullets right now. Like, I'm going to jail. I'm going to jail. Oh my God, we're all going to jail. So I think that because that particular part is like no longer in the running, maybe if there was like an extra step where they had to sign a waiver that's like, I take full legal responsibility if somebody dies in this experiment and it's not on the doctor, adding that extra little stipulation, that might dramatically change the outcome of Milgram experiments.
Well, I think it would absolutely dramatically change it, because the nature of the experiment is you are doing an evil deed under the umbrella of authority. So the authority's given you the ability to do this evil deed. Will you choose your own moral systems, or will you do this, what you consider an evil deed, because authority has given you the umbrella for it?
I don't know if the evil deed part holds up though, because that's expecting every single person in those experiments to understand how much voltage would be fatal. You know what I mean? Like they don't necessarily sit you down and say, now, by the way, the voltage we've got this cranked up to, this will kill a human being. Okay, hit the button. They're not saying that. So the bumpkin on the other side of that, like they're just assuming that the doctor got all the settings and that they know what's within acceptable limits. I think like there's extra parts where the person needs to be a rube in a certain way to where they're offloading any of the burden onto this doctor. Like, well, he's got it. He'll get in trouble. If someone dies, he's the one that had me do this. So I don't know if everyone sitting in that chair hearing the person scream knows like I'm doing something bad or immoral. You know what I mean? Like they're offloading the morality onto this doctor.
It's not like it was a one-time event. They would up the voltage. So each time you knew you were harming another human being for doing something as simple as
but does everyone know which the level of voltage that would actually be fatal, that would actually harm somebody, right? Because low down on the scale, I mean, if you lick a 9 volt, technically you've just, electrocuted yourself with 9 volts of electricity.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, it would be hard to tell on a scale of like 9 volts versus death. And every person sitting in that Milgram experiment does not go through a refresher of like, here's 9 volt, here's death.
Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, you're coming in just fine.
Okay. So I think what the experiment is testing though is how willing people are to inflict pain, right? It's not like a question of, oh, is the person going to die or not? Like it was something they observed, right? Is that like multiple people shocked them like at levels that if they had actually been shocking them, they would have killed them, right? Like they mentioned that, but I think the headline here is that almost all people will torture somebody who's screaming in agony if they're given permission to do so, right? like that's the part that is morally reprehensible is hearing another human being be in pain and continuing to do that to somebody when you know you're inflicting pain, right? Even if there's no permanent damage, the pain enough is morally bad enough, right? That's torture.
Well, I believe one of the other stipulations of the Milgram experiment is that you're informed that the person that you're shocking also signed up for this, that they weren't like involuntarily there as like a prisoner or something. So I guess the idea was like if me and you decide that like I'm like I've got a taser, be like, hey bro, like if you let me tase you, then you can tase me, right? like you're going to scream and you're going to feel pain, but there's almost like an acceptance. Like you agreed to go through this. Therefore, when I tease you and you scream from it, it's not like I'm sadistic. It's like we agreed to do this, even though it doesn't. Again, and the Milgram spirit would be like a weird thing to go through. Someone's like, hey, sit down in this room and you're going to be shocking someone every time you hit this button. It's not that much different than Ben being like, hey, let's shock each other with his taser for kicks.
Yeah, I think I hear you. I definitely see that side of it, right? But I guess I think the point it's making is a much deeper and darker point about humanity and permission structures for violence against people, right? Like the same, like I think the same factors at play in that experiment are like how you have Nazis who are like guards at concentration camps who like see atrocities and go along with it. Like it's the same idea at play. Is like, well, they had orders. It wasn't their fault. You know, they didn't put these people here. It's not their decision to do this. They're just following the experiment rules, right?
Well, that's my impression of Milgram. Is the strongest aspect was that it's like this proof of appeal to authority, that if you got a guy in a lab coat that's looking superficial and he's got a clipboard, then you'll pretty much do whatever they say. And then you can figure out, based on someone going through the Milgram experiment, how suggestible they are, how much they might just bow to authority immediately. So if someone comes up wearing a name tag or like a police uniform and they're just like, hey, go and do this thing, you can guess that the person that dialed it all the way to the right and kept shocking the person, they might just do what you tell them without asking. And then what like Ben was saying, like that rebel gene, that might be the guy that's like, screw you, I'm not doing that. You know, like that might be the personality that you can find in that. But I think the Milgram experiment wasn't about finding the rebel gene. It was more about how far will someone go with authority. Like I think you could possibly spin the Milgram experiment to self-harm, but it would have to be like you're sitting next to a biochemist and they're going to put a drop of a liquid in this water and they're assuring you that it won't kill you. So like one drop, all right, take a sip out of the water. And you're just going to go based on them telling you, don't worry, you can, now let's put 10 drops in. Well, like there might be a certain level when you're making this like a lethal dose of poison, but as long as they're there wearing the lab coat telling you, so now it's the exact same dynamic of submitting to authority without like the sadism part, right?
So with submitting to authority without the sadism, would you consider 2020 a worldwide Milgram experiment?
Oh, yeah, great example of that. You know what? One maybe on a smaller localized level is like you go to your buddy.
It wasn't that small, dude.
Well so let's say someone goes to like the Balderson compound and they're like, give me a dab. And they're like, I'll trust that you know how much to give me and of what potency and all that stuff. Like they might never wake up again, or they might like not walk for 4 days if you give them the right amount.
Is always the correct potency and amount.
Well, but the point being is that if they go to you and they're like, I trust you, your judgment, give me the dose. It's basically the Milgram experiment. Like every time someone says like, load me up a bowl or something, or like go get me some drug that I want, like that's a Milgram experiment of how much I trust you as the authority figure.
Well, where I would differentiate is like, let's take the 6 foot rule with the masks. A lot of people knew that was absolutely ridiculous. Any construction worker that's ever worn an N95 mask knew that was fucking ridiculous. So that's where the pinch comes in. Is if you're coming to me, you already want to get stoned out of your mind anyways. So you're trusting me to make sure that happens, and it will.
Right, like the willing participant that's getting shocked.
But this is something where you were conceding to authority, even though you know it's bullshit or that you think it's wrong. So these people that stood there, and there was plenty of them in 2020 who stood there and said, this is fucking stupid, but they still did it.
I think the big difference is the Milgram experiment. It was isolated. It was you're in a room with the scientists, no other observers. So you didn't necessarily have a societal pressure to like do the thing. Because if you had a group of people and they're dialing the thing up, and every time you hit the button, you hear someone in the background going like, "Oh, can you believe he's still hitting that button?" You know, like now you've got the social commentary. Maybe now you're like, "Oh, I'm not going to hit that button," like, you know, like because you're doing it for the audience. And I think that that's probably the biggest difference, is that the 2020 thing and the 6 foot distance rule. It's like, well, everyone else in the store is walking down this aisle in this one direction, so like even though
I loved going the opposite way. It was my favorite thing to do.
Rebel gene.
Specifically line the other way around. I'd start at the complete opposite end because they'd have it geared to where you like start on this end going this way, and then you end on at the very end going out the other way. And I'm like, I'm purposely going to go the other way. And if anybody said anything, it's just like, oops, and still keep it. Like, what are you going to do? Stop me? Are you going to stop me from shopping? Like, I'm already here. I'm wearing the stupid mask. Like, what else do you want from me? You're not going to tell me I can't go one way or the other. But I think I understand the social pressure piece that you're saying, but it was more like not even necessarily social pressure. It was just a nuisance of people yelling at you. It was like, just stop, you know?
Well,
like
they closed the whole store because I walked in without a mask. They closed the store. Did not let anybody in because, oh my God, it was a mask. I got a question for
we know that story's not true. You didn't walk anywhere.
Oh my God.
You opened the door, Baldy.
I don't get it. Oh, there you go.
He's in a wheelchair.
Oh, there. Oh,
him and I are friends. I'm not being a dickhead.
No, I'm just kidding. I was at my
I actually have a question.
I was being a dickhead, but because we're friends.
It's okay. It's okay. I will repay you some way. Remember, there are certain people watching, Baldy. That's all I'm saying.
Love you, security.
Yeah. You better suck up because you're fucked at this point. Anyway,
I got kicked out of a 4-year-old's birthday party it was my own niece.
Oh wow.
Because I guess I didn't get kicked out. I left. I took my family and left. But I mean, we walked in, and it was like kind of my liberal sister. It was like super liberal. All her liberal friends were there, and nobody was wearing a mask. And I was like, okay, great. Like, finally, we were putting all this behind us. And then my sister comes up to me with masks and is like, hey, can you and your family all wear masks since you guys are the unvaccinated ones? I think you're the only unvaccinated ones here. Would you mind wearing masks so the rest of us can feel safe? I'm like, well, any one of you could have it. So are you all going to wear masks to protect me as well?
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't stop you from getting it.
Yeah, like
it.
there's no
my
like
goodness.
if anything, you should all feel like you don't need a mask since you all have this extra protection. But
right.
I like try to like just be the bigger person, but I'm like, I'm getting out of here.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Spin, you had a question?
1 second, I'm getting my revenge.
He's getting his revenge. I had a question about the original topic about the eugenics.
Mm-hmm.
Did you already kind of go through all that?
No, you're welcome to ask anything about the Mm-hmm.
Well, I just wondered if you covered people choosing abortion in the case of Down syndrome, like early genetic testing.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I mean,
like,
I think that would be classic eugenics, but that one, there's a difference if you're making the decision versus the state is making the decision for you. Those are like the two different approaches.
Oh my gosh.
Both of those are eugenics.
In what case would the state ever make that decision for you, though?
Well, again, the 1907 eugenics legislation that was only repealed in 1974. So that was literally on the books for 70 years, where the state could force you to get sterilized.
They force you for sterilization?
Forced sterilization, yeah.
For what cause?
If you were a criminal, if you were a rapist, which I guess is the same thing, or if you failed a test that marked you as an idiot or an imbecile. If you meet any of those criteria on paper, then the state could forcibly have you sterilized.
Yeah, but I mean,
the state of California being the biggest.
that certainly hasn't been common practice in a long
Well,
time.
no,
right?
but there's legal precedent that not only was it common practice for decades, but that it was only taken off the books in 74. But that was just because it was one of those things like, why is this even on the books? This is so horrendous.
Right.
So they were like, okay, and it was mostly performative because it was not common practice. But that just officially made it so the state no longer has the ability. But technically, until 74, they could forcibly, by law, they could have. It would have been a huge uproar, I'm sure.
Yeah, but we would all agree that whether it's by state order or it's by personal decision, like killing a child in the womb because it's going to have Down syndrome or autism or any other disorder, really, is like kind of classic eugenics, right?
Well, yeah, but I think that one it's so much more direct, where it's like, here's a specific thing that you're trying to avoid in this generation. Like you want to avoid having Down syndrome or some other incapacitated child, like for this very generation, versus the general idea of eugenics is we're talking like 5-6 generations down the line. You're talking about when you're not even on the planet anymore, to that level of planning. Because what you're talking about is more of like eliminating a personal inconvenience versus trying to change the entire path of your genetic line.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. So is the contention that the United States practices, like active gene manipulation today?
It's essentially that there would not have been a World War II eugenics program without the United States funding ours and inspiring theirs. And then just like paperclip, as soon as their country fell, as soon as Germany fell, we just like re-inherited all of the eugenicists again, changed the name of the foundations, and continued the exact same operations.
Okay, so like how have these organizations put eugenics into practice in the modern, post World War II era?
The largest aspect is definitely going to be like pro-abortion, birth control, conception. A lot of that ends up, but then also using genetics for food supplies. That also becomes a really easy way to basically decide who gets fed and who doesn't, who gets better nutrients and who doesn't. The other biggest one, which doesn't have as much of the shock and awe, but immigration policy does more for eugenics than sterilization and euthanasia combined.
Okay, but now we're getting into more of like kind of conspiratorial land, right?
I don't think so. Because again, the Immigration Act from 1924, that was based on eugenics. That was we're gonna, instead of having to sterilize, we're just gonna make sure certain types of people don't make it into our country, therefore they can't reproduce in our country. I mean, we still have immigration laws. They were founded in eugenic practices.
So what I guess what I mean to say is that there are no organizations currently active today that would state as part of their, objectives, right? You're not going to be able to point to anybody who's in an official government capacity who says we are trying to alter the genetic destiny of the American people, or of the human race for that matter. Like, it's just, no one is going to be saying that out loud, right? So what you're contending is, let me make sure I got you straight on this, right? Is either that it's all based in eugenics. So the eugenics is all baked into the cake. So even though none of them have any idea that they're advancing eugenics, they are, by having certain laws on the books, because they're not
there's a number that are doing exactly what you're saying. For example, the originally it was called the Rockefeller Population Council. Right now, today in 2026, it's just called the Population Council. But that is exactly what they are basically enacted to do. Although the way that they describe themselves is they're doing HIV and AIDS research and social science for developing countries, and that they're focused on reproductive health. Like the way that they phrase it is different, but it's the same program. Like this is literally the exact same Rockefeller Population Council that's just now called the Population Council. The same thing with the Huxleys. There was the European Eugenics Foundation. That one is still around. The American Breeders Association is still around. It's just called the American Genetics Association.
But we're not talking about government agencies anymore, right? These are private agencies, right?
Yes. Yeah, correct. They were always private agencies. The difference was that when the state was allowed to enact it, the state basically could like prescribe you that like you're getting sterilized and the sterilization's happening through this wing, like this private organization, because they were funded by private organizations.
So let me restate one more time. I want to make sure I got what you're saying down right. So there's basically you're saying there's before World War II, the United States had a great eugenics program that the Nazis then copied. After World War II, those, all of that eugenics ideology and methods all came back to the United States, just like Operation Paperclip, right? And those people, they didn't go work for the government. They joined these non-governmental organizations, like almost these activist groups, whose goal at the time was eugenics and to, adjust the human race and to make us better and stronger and smarter, and to probably like some bullshit like keep the genome pure, keep the brown people out of the white genes, right?
They can't say it like that, but ultimately, but I also say, sure, don't discount the concept of the revolving door between government and private agency, where one day you're working for a private agency and the next day you're at the Department of Public Health, and then a year later you're back in private agency. So like it's very, very difficult to separate the state versus private. What it's easier to do is trace the money. Like, where did the money come from to found that organization? Who's actually putting the money in for the state agency, and who are the players that are jumping between those two? And that's basically why I'm focusing on like the Huxleys and like the Rockefellers, because you can trace Rockefeller Foundation funding, whether it's going to the state or whether it's going to private industry, a lot easier.
So can you have like evidence, like, smoking gun indisputable, that the government is giving taxpayer money to these organizations who are advancing the cause of eugenics? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. But I think now it's like, how do you want to define eugenics? Because after World War II, every eugenics organization changes their name and they stop calling it eugenics. They start calling it a million other things. So how do you pinpoint a smoking gun evidence when literally pre-World War II, they're like, this is for eugenics. We want to eliminate imbeciles and feeble-minded people and anyone that has lower than 100 IQ. You can't say that now in 2026 because it has all this baggage, but that's essentially what they're still doing in their actions, even if it's not being stated directly in their mission statement on the website.
Right. But I mean, I think at that point, right, you're making a claim that is very serious that would require a lot of evidence to back up, right? Like, I'm not saying you haven't presented any evidence already, right? Like the fact, for instance, that they used to be this organization, we know their history, and then all they did is drop the whatever from their name. Like, hey, that's evidence. But
I agree. It's not smoking gun evidence, but it's like, here's these 10 organizations that were originally founded explicitly for the sole purpose of enacting eugenics and researching and promoting eugenics. And the only thing that's changed in 100 years is their name and the verbiage that they're using. But the actual things they're doing, which is promoting different sorts of like birth control and sterilization programs and incentives for people to self-sterilize or to put off childbirth. All of these things are the exact same methodologies that they were using when they were openly calling themselves something. So even if the names change around, like the practices are still there. So I mean, it's hard to say it's a smoking gun, but the company's the same and it's being run by the same people with the same money, but they've changed the name of the procedures.
Well, and we can't do anything about private organizations that want to do crazy or even evil shit, right? Like all we can do is kind of expose them for the bad ideas that they are, and then that'll kind of deal with them because they won't have any support. But I think what you could do, I think what would be really interesting, I'd love to to get this info is like whoever the worst organization is, like the clearest path you can trace of eugenics, of them promoting the cause, name them, who are they, who's the worst organization, and then just show me over the last 20 years how much money they've received from the federal government, if that kind of stuff is public knowledge.
Well, do we
because
let
we
me
can
ask
control
you-
the government, we can control our elected officials, and if they're going to vote for things that, then I can go to my elected official and say, hey, you see this organization, this is clearly advancing the cause of eugenics, I don't support that, and I'm going to vote you out because you voted for this funding to go to them, right?
I mean,
but
in 2026, it seems like, for better or for worse, that ultimately has been with like the pro-choice, pro-life debate. Like that's kind of where the battleground is for this particular issue, even though that's just like a tiny little wing of the entire eugenics movement. But that's the one place that's the most visible and the most political right now.
So you're saying you couldn't go back and take the top organization of eugenics and trace how much, like we wouldn't be able to tell how much money they've got from the federal government?
No, because the largest donors of eugenics for the first half of the 20th century was the Rockefeller Foundation. But the Rockefeller Foundation is not only focused on eugenics. It's got a million different initiatives, not a million, but it's got multiple initiatives that are completely unrelated from eugenics. So then it would become a forensic exercise and like, let's break down all the different money and figure out which went to this department, that department.
Yeah.
The one that makes the easiest, again, is like a Planned Parenthood aspect, but that becomes political because not everyone necessarily considers that eugenics to the same level as before sterilization.
So I think, just to kind of put a bow on this, like, and not to demean you, I think the information you've been providing is great. I love it. I just kind of in lack of like that sort of evidence where I can clearly draw a line between here's the government supporting this organization, here's the money going to them from our government, my tax dollars, he voted for it, right? And like when I don't have that, then I kind of like, to me, it's kind of conspiracy land, like it's kind of just a conspiracy at that point where I don't really have any evidence. I have like a good story, right? Like a really sensational narrative that, like could even be true, but I don't have enough evidence to like find that convincing, And
Well,
I'm not saying
fair.
I fault you for finding it convincing.
Well, I think it's a fair critique because the way that the money flows now, it's not that the government. First of all, the government doesn't. It's not like the government's giving Bill Gates money. It's the opposite. It's like Bill Gates would be giving the government money, and he's the one that wants to enact eugenics as like a private individual. So, but let's just go with your analogy with like the government is the one that's funding it, even though they're broke compared to Bill Gates. But the government does give money to Microsoft and give money to other companies that end up trickling down into Bill Gates' pocket, where he amasses his billions, which he can then use to enact his global population plans. And I know that sounds like conspiracy, but again, like literally what he was talking about in his own TED talk about reducing global population by 1 billion people, he's doing that because he has the money and the resources to do it. And it's not like the government is going to be like, here's the official Bill Gates eugenics wipe out African babies act, and they sign it. It's just going to be like, hey, we've purchased this, X amount, and then he gets the profit and he gets to go and do this thing. So yeah, because of World War II, I don't think we're ever going to see on the books the government putting their name on something that says, here we are supporting eugenics. They're just going to allow things to happen that are conducive to eugenics, but allowing private industry to really be the catalyst. Because again, even in the 1900s, private industry, those were the ones that were funding eugenic search. At no point was the government putting their own money up for a lot of this.
I'm trying to figure out I've been watching this the whole time.
So,
and what
go ahead.
What I hear is a cross between complete conspiracy theory and complete mental health. I could not fathom with very big shadow of the doubt that this is not going on in today's society. It may have in the past.
Well, which aspect in particular?
I mean, the part where, you know, something like Bob Barker said, please have your children or your genealogy spayed or neutered. That's completely absurd in my opinion. And I would like to see some sort of proofism that it is happening.
Well, I guess the proof of this, it's not Bob Barker saying spay yourself. It would be going into Africa and spreading birth control where there wasn't some prior to that. Like a foreign...
I'm in the United States. I don't want to hear anything about Africa or Germany or anything. I'm in the United States, right?
Well, that's the concept, though. He's saying, like, instead of just saying neuter yourself, right? They're approaching it in different aspects that are like a soft landing, propaganda wise, like, hey, you know, just like Planned Parenthood, plan your family. You have other things you need to do while you're young. You know, same thing like going into Africa and handing out condoms and birth control. Like, hey, prevent things from happening because your resources are limited and you can't afford this, or, you know, so do this so you could still participate in sex or, you know, whatever, but you don't have to worry about having a baby and trying to resource it to provide for a baby. It's a soft landing. It sounds better.
Well, I think Africa's relevant just because it's different phases. So the immigration policy, let's just go with like Africa right now. The immigration policy might prevent Africans from entering the country. So there's one stage of a eugenics very soft version where if Africans don't enter, then they can't reproduce with other people in the States. So therefore, within the States, we're preventing the eugenics. Now, if you want to prevent it even more, you limit the number of Africans there are in Africa through like a Bill and Melinda Gates initiative. And now you have to worry about even less of them even making it to the border, where now you have to rely on immigration policy to prevent that from happening. And then if they do get in, well, now you have like the Planned Parenthood as the last case resort. So like it's this three-pronged effort. Like a true eugenics program since day one has always been about global population. It was never just about my city or my country. It was like the entire world needs to be culled in this certain way. So like you limit it in Africa first, then you enact an immigration policy to prevent them from getting in. And then if they do get in, then you have either Planned Parenthood or in the extreme cases of the early 1900s, forced sterilization.
Okay. Does that make better sense, Spin?
Oh, it makes sense. It's mental health. That's...
I mean, have you looked into any of this in any way, shape, or form, Spin?
Oh, I've been sitting here reading the what I would call propaganda, and in my 48 years, I have never heard anything remotely close to this. Not that I was sheltered, because I wasn't.
Well, you definitely were. You definitely were.
Well, anything
that Fox News didn't say, you don't know about.
Well, let me ask you this.
I don't ride the conspiracy theory. Okay, I don't.
Well, he wasn't really delving into conspiracy theory. That's why he has everything to back up what he's talking about.
Well, I'm curious though, that if we're talking about you've never heard any of this before, prior to this, have you heard that the eugenics movement started in America and that we're the ones that inspired Germany to continue what we started?
Are you talking about Galton in 1883?
Well, no, because he wasn't really American, but he's the one that started eugenics as a movement. But Galton threw that very first International Congress of Eugenics, and this is where 42 of the 58 research papers were all from America. Even though it was an international Congress, we by far were the most enthusiastic about this, and America was the first country to pass sterilization laws based on eugenics. That was the one in 1907. Then it was the Immigration Act in 1924, I think. The combination of the U.S. sterilization law and then the Immigration Act, that is literally what the German Nazis built their eugenics program on. They used our laws as an example of here's the way that we can illegally enact this, and here's the justification for it. So, I mean, I don't think that's even conspiracy. That is stated fact. Hitler himself gave credit to this, and the Nazi Party cited California as an example of here's America doing it, and they seem to be doing just fine.
Well, I mean, we all know in today's society, California is just needs to fall off the map. Just saying.
Well, that's what I was saying. Like, if that was the one that had the most happening, like, then I guess the plan didn't work because California is just a hot mess and it's people and they shit in the streets, like so on and so forth. Like, if it was supposed to work, why didn't it work?
And you know, you're right, Sarah. California is like, well, parts of California are a third world country just in the United States. I mean,
most of those people aren't from California, though. You have to
I know.
California, people that want to live this homeless life migrate to California like man.
Yeah, because the California government and
so I mean that wouldn't really apply to a birth
it's program. in terms of like who's running California, right? And how in its history of how it's become more and more and more progressive over the years, right? That's not homeless people coming in and determining these legislation and things that they have going on, right? Those are just people that happen to be going there. But California in and of itself, politically,
go pick them all up and take them down to vote.
Well, here,
right, but still politically, though, it's progressively become left, and progressive. But like the elites are there with the propaganda, the money that they have for funding for their political campaigns, so on and so forth. That comes from within, right? And those would be like, I'm not saying that genetically speaking, it's carried down, and this is the proof in the pudding, but it kind of feels that way if you think about it. It's like, well, if they were the one that did it the most, and they still haven't, like, was California ever good?
It was actually a conservative state years ago.
Ronald Reagan was from California.
Yeah, Reagan was from California.
Well, he was an actor, though. I wouldn't trust him.
But he was the governor of California before he was president.
He's one of the greatest.
California used to be conservative. There was basically two things. Thomas covered the removal of the eugenics program, which was heavy in California, and the other big hit that happened was they shut down all the insane asylums and just opened up the floodgates. And it's absolutely been wild since then. And those people congregate here, and then they do vote. Like, that's part of why these really wild things get passed. Like, if you go down to basically any town in California that's along the coast, there's more homeless people than there is in the town. And every time they go to vote, they literally send buses down to get these people. They take them in, give them a shower, give them a meal. That's nice stuff. And then give them some propaganda and then take them to vote. And it's wild what they can get past, because even right now, an interesting one is that they want to tax billionaires 5%, an excise tax that they're just we're just taking this fucking money because you got too much and we want it. And even because Newsom is trying to make the maneuver into the federal stage, he's currently fighting that, and he's losing by a lot. Like, because the people here are overriding it, because all you got to do is get this mass of people that are voting for a shower and a dinner, like to do it. In fact, there's been people, like, in some of these bills that they're making, there's actual exposés where they're giving homeless people cigarettes, all kinds of things to come up and sign these things.
Well, and I see this a lot in my family is from Brazil. And I think the poorer a civilization is and a people are, the more susceptible they are to communism and to the idea of, we're just going to take everybody's stuff and just trust us. We're going to hand it all out fairly. You know, like just trust us. We're gonna give it to all the right people, and we won't keep any extra for ourselves at all.
One of the other interesting trends of this too, if you look into the people that were funding all of these early eugenics programs in the 1900s, they were also all in favor of world governments and of singular authority governments, like this new world order concept. And I know it sounds like conspiracy theory, but these are like their words. They're literally saying that I'm in support of a one world government because that would help push forward this eugenics program. It's the only way to have something like this work on scale, because not everyone's going to buy into it. So you'd have to kind of force it.
I want to make sure I get your claim here right, because I think on the stream in the description it says like eugenics is actually, there's more eugenics going on right now
absolutely
than there was prior to.
That's contingent on you accepting that the practice of abortion is within the field of eugenics. If you accept that premise, then I mean I've got some of the numbers on how many resources go into this, but like the U.S. is 43% globally.
I don't think I do accept that most abortions are being caused by a eugenics agenda.
Well, caused, I think, is doing too much lifting there, though, because
well, hold on though. You're the one who's claiming that there's more eugenics going on right now than there was back when we were sterilizing and sterilizing mongoloids. I'm using language appropriate for the time, mongoloids and retards. Like back when we were doing that was atrocious and awful. And I also think that abortion is atrocious and awful, right? But it's not the motive matters, right? The motive behind all these abortions matters. And unfortunately, the motive is like, I just don't want a baby right now.
Well, I don't know. I think I would disagree with you on this, but also this would be such a fundamental disagreement that we might have to agree to disagree. But I have a personal belief that you can't ever really truly know the motive of something behind someone. Even someone telling you what their motive is, you can't necessarily trust that they're being honest with you or even themselves. So all we really have to judge someone on is the actual things that have happened, and not necessarily.
I mean, we determine motive in a court of law, though, right? Like
I understand it. In a court of law, motive makes all the difference between like manslaughter and homicide, right? If you accidentally killed someone or you pre-planned it and you meant to kill someone. When it comes into eugenics, though, and like if we're talking within the realm of abortion, here's the different incentive. If it's 1907 and eugenics is legal, and we're removing the forced version because that was really criminals and someone that society was like, yeah, we're going to turn a blind eye. But the biggest way in America was a financial incentive. You would get paid money in order to sterilize yourself, and it was a win-win. Like, I don't want you to have kids. Here's $100. You needed $100. Great, like problem solved. And that's still happening now. But instead of you getting paid $100, it's like, can you afford a $30,000 hospital bill right now? Can you afford how much Similac is going to cost every year for the next 3 or 4 years? Like, can you afford all of this? So it's like they've inverted it, but it's still a financial decision. That, like, if you were to say, here's your baby and here's 50 grand to go on top of it, or you never have to pay for anything baby or child rearing related ever, do you still want to have it? I think it would definitely tip the scales one way or the other, but we don't live in a world where we can do that A/B test reliably.
I understand. I think, I think like the fundamental disagreement there is like you're attributing all of these things, all of these abortions to like forces acting upon people. But I attribute the murder of that child to the mother. Like she aborted that baby. Like I understand that formula is expensive. I understand the hospital visits is expensive. I understand it was a tough decision. I understand all these things. It doesn't change like the objective truth that you murdered that child, right?
I don't disagree with that, but I would say that there's a system that has been set up that historically is founded in eugenics. But that system is catering to that path. It's like electricity and water follow the path of least resistance. So if you have a system set up to where this is the path of least resistance, then it's really hard to debate whether the person made that choice themselves or if that just seemed like the only other option that they had.
Well, didn't they even? You could even take it to like the Indian reservations when they had the abortion clinics. You could go in. The girls could go in for an abortion, but they would come out sterilized. That was the caveat to it. It was if we're going to do this.
That was what ended the California sterilization program in the 70s. Is that there was 10 women, I think, that ended up suing USC in 1976, but in the early 70s.
We can all and
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
They went in to have children, and basically they were coerced into getting sterilized on the way out because the USC doctors were like, "I think you had one too many. Like we're cutting you off here." And they end up suing, rightfully so, and I think they win this case. But that was one of the last on the books of essentially a coerced sterilization.
Exactly, and I think that's where it comes down to, and I think this is important, right? And because I don't think that conspiracies don't exist, right? There are many documented conspiracies that we can all agree, like this was deliberately hidden from us. This is the government being evil, and so on and so forth. But it's like when you start getting into this conspiratorial thinking, right, where like we're going to attribute all these abortions to like the Rockefellers setting up eugenics organizations that then cause the abortions and like set it, we're trapped, we're like rats in this maze that are trapped, and we're forced to do these things. What you're really doing is you're taking the responsibility for people's lives out of their hands and saying like, hey, the system is set up against you. You're a cog. You don't actually have absolute control over what's going to happen to you, because you're being oppressed by these shadowy forces that like nobody will even admit they exist. And so what do you do in that situation if you really believe that you're being oppressed and that the game is rigged from the start, right? Anyone ever played Fallout New Vegas, by the way? The game was rigged from the start. Okay. Like if you really believe that, then you throw your hands up and you burn the whole system down. And I don't think that's the correct way to try and like live your life in this country. Like I think what's observable in our history is that if you make more good choices than bad choices, that living in America, you have the greatest chance of being successful of anywhere in the entire world. Like, would you agree with that?
But young girls aren't convinced that they have choices beyond after having a child, right? This is why abortion propaganda works so well, because they're convincing of like, well, can you afford and I'll tell you what, the baby formula is expensive. Diapers are expensive. Those first 3 years for sure, like it's expensive to raise a baby. In terms of being able to afford, like you could do cloth diapers and try to mitigate. Yeah, not everybody can breastfeed though. Even I had issues, right? A lot of women can have issues with it, and you're taking that. Most can, but there are still issues, and the piece behind that is that during that like the propaganda pushes, oh, well, you have a whole life to live. You have a whole life ahead of you. Just do this now. And then you can have kids later once you're married and settled down. Like now's not the time. You're still young. You have a whole future ahead of you. And we're convinced that our youth, right, like 18 to 25 or so, it should be spent doing all of these other things. So if we get pregnant, oh my gosh, you've ruined your life. You're now there's something in the way. When reality is that's not the case. I still was able to finish school. I got my master's degree even after having a child, getting married, having another child. Like all of these things were still possible for me. But young girls at that age are very impressionable, and it's a fear-mongering tactic. Like you like your freedom, right? You like to be able to come and go as you please. You like to do all of these things, but you won't be able to do that if you have a baby. Well, yeah, no shit, Sherlock, but you're also a responsible parent, you know, and you have a child and it's a blessing, right? But people don't want to look at it that way. They don't want to realize that life doesn't end just because you have a baby, but our propaganda has pushed it so well to deceive you to believe that you're making this choice for the betterment of your own life and the betterment of your future children's life, when that's really not the case.
Well, and I guess I should confess to like being a little bit hypocritical on this whole thing, because like, you know, I can say, you know, you can't live your life like this and you can't think there are shadowy forces, but I think everybody feels that at different times, like, you know, the world's out to get them. And, you know, I stand against abortion. I think it's terrible, like the murder of a child. But like when my sister came to me and said, I've got this pregnancy and this man, he's terrible and we've already broken up. He's awful to me and I can't stay with him and I can't raise a child by myself. I'm not ready to do this. Like, what did I say? Except like, okay, well, what do you need? I'll do whatever you want to do. Like, how can I help? You know, like, I'm not judging, right? But I should have said, no, don't do it. And I probably would have eventually if she had decided to, you know.
If you remove all financial restraints, though, if you're like, hey, by the way, I found this the other day. Here's a duffel bag with $1 million in it. That might change the decision, right? So again, like, it's an inverted incentive. 100 years ago, it's here's $1,000. Now it's you don't have to pay $30,000, but it's like the same. And let me just point at this too. Like, I guess I'm not really as concerned with who ultimately shares the responsibility if you were to go through and have an abortion. I guess my analogy is more like, imagine the government makes a tank, and ultimately the tank is made to blow people up and break their shit. Like, that's the reason they made the tank. But for 100 years, they don't use it for that. They just use it to transport like old ladies across the street. And it's like, they've got this tank, but at any moment, that tank can be turned back into the thing that it was designed to do. That's kind of how I see the eugenics program. Like right now, maybe we're just using it to transport, you know, poor people to places where they don't have to raise children. But at a certain point, that exact same system, the exact same plan, and the exact same people funding it, if they just dial that up to 10 and say like, oh, by the way, we've put back into law the 1907 Sterilization Act. It's back. We're back in business, baby. Like, the system and the resources are already lined up to just go ahead and push that forward. So, I mean, it's hard to determine like, oh, whose fault is it? It's like the tank's there. The government built the tank, or private industry, whoever, and the tanks are still out in the streets, but we're just kind of using them as like, you know, potted planters for the time being.
Yeah. Well, and at what point I apologize. At what point do people get tired of like degenerate culture that they eventually tap in and say, fine, just sterilize them because we're tired of it, right?
Because you dehumanize them to the point where now society's like, yes, sterilize yourself, do it. Like all like if you just started a GoFundMe that's like, hey, once this hits $100,000, you know, so like you know, Marcus is going to sterilize himself. Like, as soon as we hit $100,000, we'll guarantee that there won't be any more Marcuses out there. Like we could, like, we're not that far away from that sort of stuff.
Right. Spicoli, I see you here. Keep it clean. We're having a really good conversation. Don't dirty it down.
Can I talk?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. You might have to mute the other guys because I'm on my cell phone. Okay. If we're making a comparison, you know, I just popped in between American versus Germany as far as eugenics goes. That's two totally different arguments. The Nazis and Hitler were using eugenics to basically, well, they were getting rid of Jews, but they were mostly using eugenics to try to build what they called their Aryan race. So they were purposely not just killing Jews, but they were killing, you know, mentally retarded people, gay people, anybody that didn't fit their profile of the tall, blonde Aryan that's over 6'2", like the Chad. Even though Hitler was not Aryan looking, Joseph Goebbels walked with a limp. He was 5'5". Adolf Eichmann, Himmler, they're all it's funny because none of these dudes look like the Aryan specimen but yet the Germans bought into it. Now, as far as America eugenics goes, I mean, if you're referring to abortion being eugenics, I guess you could lump it in with that, but it's two totally different things. You know, having abortion, legalizing abortions in America is a lot different than what the Germans were doing when they were trying to eliminate people who they considered themselves superior to and try to create a master Aryan race. And we all know how that went down. And you know, the amazing thing is that literally, if you look at, you know, Hitler, who was the Fuhrer, if you look at Joseph Goebbels, who was the chief propagandist, you look at guys like Heimlich Himmler, another top SS officer, Adolf Eichmann, who was in charge of all the concentration camps. You look at these guys, none of them looked Aryan. The only Aryan-looking man, the most Aryan-looking German, was Colonel Rommel of the tank corps. He looked Aryan, and maybe Joseph Mengele looked sort of Aryan, but really the only Aryan was
Desert Fox.
Rommel, Colonel Rommel, who is literally considered probably the greatest next to Patton. He's literally he will go down. As much as I hate the Germans, Colonel Rommel was basically probably the greatest tank commander in world history. But yeah, there was two totally different things between American and German eugenics.
Yeah. I mean,
well,
you don't have to
actually
like the Germans to respect them.
Bringing up Joseph Mengele is a good example here, because it's not necessarily like America versus Germany in this dynamic. It's America created Germany, and Germany was just an extension of American eugenics gone haywire with the full state endorsement countrywide. And here's a specific example for you. In the 1930s, the Rockefeller Foundation starts pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars, which would be tens of millions in exchange rate, hundreds of thousands of dollars into the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. And the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute was run by a few different people. One of the top guys was Ottmar Verscher, and his direct assistant was Joseph Mengele. This was a literal Rockefeller-funded organization that was training Joseph Mengele that ends up enacting the Nazi programs of eugenics. So like they're using America's money to figure out how they're going to put together this entire plan. You're shaking your head no.
No, but the reality is Rockefeller may have done that, but he was not behind creating any type of Aryan race. In fact, Rockefeller was helping fund against the Nazis. So while he may have come up with, you know who Margaret Sanger is? Sanger, obviously. You know what I'm saying? She was part of Planned Parenthood. I mean, in other words, Rockefeller, whatever he did and the Germans picked up on, his intent was not to create a German master race of people that would eventually take over the world.
Right.
That was not Rockefeller's intent at all. In fact, he hated the Nazis. If anything, the Nazis just, picked up. Believe me, trust me, the Nazis had their own Germans working on this shit. Mengele himself was experimenting with Jewish twins, and one of his worst experiments was he would take Jewish twins. He was fascinated by twins, and he actually sewed them together. His worst experiment was sewing together two Jewish young girls while they were alive, and he tied their veins and organs together, and he would operate on people while they're alive with no anesthetic. This guy was a fucking monster. And you know what the weird thing is? He, unlike the other Germans that escaped and the Mossad caught some of them, or some of them killed themselves, he actually ended up going to Argentina, like a lot of them did, and he died in the 70s in a fucking drowning accident. He actually drowned, this guy. Isn't that weird? And he lived for about 20 years right after he left Nazi Germany in Argentina. So he was one of the sickest motherfuckers. So believe me, what Mengele was doing to progress eugenics and try to create a master race had nothing to do. It was way, way, way beyond what Rockefeller was doing. This guy, if you study Joseph Mengele, and there's a lot of documentation on him because the Nazis documented all their shit. This guy literally was I'm just going to say it point blank. He's one of the most evil people in the fucking world. He used to take children and who were twins again and inject different types of toxic dyes into their eyes to try to come up with blue eye color for the Aryan race. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, the whole pathetic joke was Hitler, Goebbels, Himmler, and none of these guys look like Aryans. They all look like fucking just
Regular
fucking
dude.
like they were 5'5", 5'6". They walked with limps. Hitler was a fucking drug addict. None of these guys were Aryans, yet they convinced these people that they could create this Aryan race of super chads, uber chads that had, that looked like Dolph Lundgren, the actor, like 6'2", blonde hair, eyes. So
I've got
that's
an
it. Anyway,
analogy that I think
what?
that I have an analogy that maybe answers this, because I consider Rockefeller eugenics not that different from Nazi eugenics. The difference is that Rockefeller eugenics is like having a flower bed and saying, I want to eliminate all the weeds in this flower bed so that there's only flowers left over. Nazi eugenics is like, I just want this one kind of flower. Like they're both doing the exact same things. It's just that the Nazis are hyper fixated on like a very specific thing that they're weeding everything out from. And in general, the Rockefeller eugenics is just like, well, we know how to kill weeds that we don't want. And
no, but Rockefeller never engaged in any type of experiments, or nobody in America ever experimented like Joseph Mengele did on people. Nobody, and you cannot prove that.
Those experiments.
I'm so mad.
What?
I said that the Rockefellers didn't necessarily have any eugenic experimentations tied to them, but their money did. Like the money that they put into the Wilhelm Institute went directly into the research that Mengele ends up using. So if you were if you were to at least follow the money, that's exactly where that money went.
Well, Henry Ford was a big anti-Semite and a big proponent of Hitler, and he basically helped Hitler out. And George Bush's uncle or something was involved in a bank that was caught with trading with the enemy because they were sending money over to Adolf Hitler. So there were lots of Americans that were sponsoring Hitler with different things.
But if we can get back on the topic though, like you just said Rockefeller was funding eugenics, but then you said that the USA was funding eugenics. Like Rockefeller is not the United States government.
Margaret Sanger. Look up if you know who Margaret Sanger is, it'll answer a lot of your questions. Okay, you know who Margaret Sanger is?
Yeah,
no.
Planned Parenthood.
Check her out. Anyway, I bet if I'm gonna say this before I leave. I forgot your name. I bet if Sarah and I had a baby, we'd have a perfect baby, and there would be no need to have eugenics involved in it. Just kidding. I wouldn't have a baby with you if my life depended on it. All right, thanks, gentlemen. Have a good time. Look at Margaret Sanger, and that will answer your questions.
Spicoli, I do want to give you the compliment. Thank you for engaging with the conversation. Motherfucker. That little shit.
That is the most lucid I've ever heard that dude.
That's the first time I've never yelled at him on the way out. Alan Marcus, I wanted to give you an opportunity to jump in here. Thank you for joining. Feel free if you got a question, comment, or tell everyone to fuck off for all I care.
Oh, this is just as a huge comment. I think a lot of people are focusing on one issue exactly. They're focusing on who can be the most evil, and they're looking for evidence. And so is the absence of evidence not evidence of this absence? And do we not see the hand of the benevolent master? So who is shepherding or husbanding the human population? We haven't heard any mention of Sino-dominant, so talk of China or best Korea. And is the evidence that the K-pop idols are taking over America today? Everyone wants K-pop demon hunters. So that sort of culture is now taking over the West, because maybe the West has been more lax on their programs to sponsor the arts and humanities. So because we've gotten lax
the West
on
hates
humanities.
itself. Yeah.
Finish your thought, Alan. Or was that it?
Well, go see the Michael Jackson movie and tell me how you think about that, because he was one color and then he changed to another skin color, and all the Korean pop stars today want to look like Michael Jackson and when he was on drinking Pepsi on stage.
If they really want to be like MJ, they have to light their head on fire. That's the defining moment that created.
Well, right. And we were talking about motives, and people were saying, I don't see evidence, prove the motive. Paranoid American was saying, well, motive, that's a very difficult thing to claim. Circumstances just happen sometimes, but sometimes those circumstances are guided by benevolent hands that we just.
Do you mean malevolent, like evil?
I'm saying benevolent, like for the greatest good.
You're saying eugenics is benevolent?
Is it?
I wouldn't say so.
I think it's neutral. I honestly think it's a neutral thing. No,
I'll let you finish, but that's a wild claim, right?
Well, that's how they sneak in. You'll get rid of your Down syndrome babies. We'll get rid of your cancer. These are all undeniably good things. It's the other things that they do that they aren't telling you about. That's when a problem comes in. It's where that leads. Like he kept talking about Huxley. He kept talking about Huxley.
Hold on.
Wait till I'm done, dude. He kept talking about Huxley. That's where Brave New World comes from, is the Huxley family.
Yes.
We all can see where they think the eugenics program should end up going, where we need a batch of engineers this week. Boom, we punch out engineers.
No. You can't say that Huxley was trying to advocate for eugenics when he wrote Brave New World. No.
Absolutely. Oh, without question.
It was a satire. It was a dystopia, not a utopia. That was the
right. It was
only a dystopia if you're one of the ones that wants to live in the savage lands, which I do.
All right, I have a question to the audience. Number one,
I'm the audience, by the way, so shut the fuck up.
You're what? He's what?
He's the audience, by the way. So shut
okay. Up. Well, okay, fair enough. You guys haven't really done anything towards the dono goal, but I am enjoying this conversation so much that I actually want to keep going. So I guess we can go ahead, and I don't want the show to go beyond the 3-hour mark though. So I'm going to maneuver us over to the gauntlet. And that way I could at least cut this one off and we can continue over there. But I will do the 1 hour rule, and it's going to be a hard set one. So just warning to all of you that that's how we're going to ride it. And then we'll go from there. Okay. So I'm going to set up the gauntlet now. You guys can start switching over. Not you guys, the audience. They can start moving over. And then,
send me the link. I'll donate. I love hearing from you guys. You're all crazy. You're crazy people, but I like what you're saying. It's very interesting.
Well, we're over at the gauntlet debate now. I'm shutting the Raging Tomato down now. But yeah, it's all over there.
I'll be back.
You'll be back. Is that what you said?
No, don't come back. You're too much.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. Have you seen him before, Balderson, or anyone? Just a random.
Never seen him. No.
Fair enough. All right. Just want to make sure he's like not somebody's friend that I'm like, I don't know.
I mean, I am a person who just randomly joins conversations on the internet, so I try to be understanding, but you should try to have an intelligent thought.